There are wounds that don't bleed, they simply etch themselves into the face of a mother who once loved too much. That day, I heard my daughter speak, her voice sweet as dew but cold as steel. "Mom, sign it. Let us hold this beach house to keep it safe." On the table lay a transfer contract, the house worth $300,000, the dream I'd spent half a lifetime to dare to touch. I looked at my two children, once the light of my life, now two strangers counting digits in their mother's eyes. I didn't cry. I poured more tea, smiled softly, and set my hand on the recorder button fixed under the table. Outside, the waves kept breaking steady like my heart, slow, steady, and no longer afraid. Because sometimes, the moment you realize family ties also have a price is when you finally learn the true value of freedom. And I just sat there, calmly watching the first day of their payback begin. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Josephine Myers, 67 years old, living in Clearwater, Florida, where the sea is crystal blue and the wind tastes as salty as memory. For 10 years, Mother's Day has been nothing more than a quiet morning to me. No knock at the door, no flowers delivered, only the ticking wall clock and the old air conditioner's soft breath. I still woke early as usual, brewed coffee, set the table, and laid out the hand-embroidered cloth my mother left me, a habit no one remembered but me. I arranged white porcelain plates, set out butter cookies and a tray of fresh strawberries. I cooked Southern-style beef stew, the dish Lauren and Tyler once fought over as kids. Back then, whenever I made it, we'd sit around the table and laugh late into the night. Now, that kitchen held only the sound of a spoon tapping the pot and the smudged noise of fading memories. By 10 a.m., I checked my phone only to see a blank screen. No texts, no calls. I opened Facebook, telling myself maybe my kids were busy. Then a photo popped up right on top. Lauren, my daughter, at a fancy restaurant in Tampa, holding a glass of champagne, with Tyler and their friends beside her. The caption read, "Perfect Sunday with the people who matter most." I looked at that line 3-4 times until it blurred with the steam from my cup. The people who matter most. And I wasn't in that frame. I set the phone on the table and looked at the stew simmering gently. The smell of onion, garlic, carrots. Once the scent of family had become the smell of loneliness, seasoned to perfection. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I just felt a very soft crack inside, like wind splitting a window pane. No one heard it but me. That afternoon, I took my meal out to the porch, watched the empty street, and felt hollow as cars drifted by. I thought, maybe next year will be different. Maybe they're just busy. But then memories rolled back like a slow film. Last year, my daughter texted me at 11 p.m. "Sorry, Mama. The day got away from one. Love you." Tyler stayed silent all day. Then a week later sent a short line. "Been busy, Mom." I realized their forgetting wasn't accidental anymore. It was a habit, grown large by my own silence. That night, I lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the fan spin. I asked myself, when did I disappear from their lives? When they got married? When money arrived? Or when I stopped lending? I had sold my wedding ring to pay Lauren's tuition, mortgaged the house to help Tyler open a garage, and thought that was love. Turns out those sacrifices taught them that mom is a given. The next morning I brewed coffee, but this time I skipped the usual milk. I wanted that bitterness to remind me it was time to wake up. I pulled out an old folder where I kept a few shares from my old company and a savings book I'd never touched. After doing the math, I saw I had enough $300,000, enough to buy a small beach house where I could start over. No one needed to know. No one needed permission. I booted up my old computer, checked Zillow, and scrolled through hundreds of listings. When I saw a white wooden house with 2 bedrooms and a big porch facing the sea, I stopped. Asking price, $299,000. Short description: a peaceful coastal home for a new beginning. I smiled. Maybe this was the invitation meant for me. I called Denise Harper, a local real estate agent who had helped my friend a few years back. Denise heard my voice and said, "If you truly want peace, I have a place that matches exactly what you sent. I think you'll love it." 2 days later, I took a bus for over 3 hours to St. Augustine, the oldest seaside city in America. The wind carried salt and a hint of jasmine from somewhere, and I felt lighter by the minute. The house sat on a small street shaded by palms. The white paint had yellowed, but the frames were solid. Denise opened the door with a warm smile. "Welcome to your new beginning." As I stepped in, the sound of waves drifted from afar, blending with wind teasing the windows, the kind of sound that makes you believe in good things. I said only 4 words: "I want to buy." A week later, the contract was done. I signed with a slightly shaky hand, but my heart felt light as air. For the first time in years, I did something just for me. Not for my kids, not for anyone, not to prove a thing. Denise hugged me in congratulations. But before leaving, she looked at me and said seriously, "Josephine, I say this because I care. When you move in, find your own attorney to make sure no one can challenge your ownership. I've seen too many people lose their assets to their own kids." I smiled, thinking it was just professional caution. But that night, when I played Tyler's voicemail, "Hey Mom, heard you bought a house. Must be nice having all that money saved up," my heart went cold. The next morning, I called Denise. She referred me to attorney Maya Chen, 35 years old, who specializes in protecting seniors' rights. At our first meeting, Maya sat across from me, clear and steady. "Miss Josephine, what you described, distant children who suddenly care when assets appear, is a classic pattern of financial abuse within families. I suggest creating a trust and setting up an evidence protection system. The sooner, the better." I nodded. We worked on the documents together. Maya helped me open a personal fund, set up legal powers of attorney, and install home security cameras. She even helped me buy a small recorder, a coin-sized button I could stick under the table. A week later, I moved into the new beach house. In the mornings, I opened the windows, breathed in the salt, and listened to gulls crying in the distance. I started a journal, recording each day as proof of my new life. For the first time in years, I didn't need a text message to know I still existed. Then, this year's Mother's Day came around again. I expected nothing, just planned a small lunch for myself: clam chowder and butter cookies. At 11 a.m., the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Lauren and Tyler stood there with a man in a black suit, a briefcase in his hand. "Hi, Mom. We thought we'd surprise you." They hugged me lightly. Lauren's perfume drowned out the sea breeze. We sat at the table. I poured tea and asked gently, "It's been a while since you dropped by." Lauren smiled. "I just want to make sure you're safe in this house." I was surprised when the man opened his case and pulled out a stack of papers. "This is a transfer agreement. You just need to sign so they can hold it for you, avoid scams." I looked at the pages, tiny print and blank lines, waiting for my signature. Tyler added with a hint of pity, "We only want what's best for you. $300,000 isn't a small amount." I set the cookie plate down and looked at them one by one. In that moment, all the years of sacrifice, cold dinners, nights waiting by the phone, played backward like an old film. I said nothing. I just poured more tea, smiled, and let my hand slide under the table to brush the recorder button. The soft click blended with the distant surf. Outside, sunlight flickered on the tea like a small flame. They thought I was weak. They thought I'd sign today. But they didn't know that on this Mother's Day, they hadn't come to take. They'd come to start facing the price of what they'd done. Sometimes I ask myself, when do people start walking away from you when they leave home, or the moment they stop listening? After that Mother's Day lunch, when my children left behind half-finished teacups and an unsigned contract, I sat a long time in the kitchen. The scent of butter cookies still lingered, but the warmth had gone long ago. I looked out at the sea as sunlight slanted across the water, and the old years began to rewind in my mind, like a faded film. I once believed we were a small, happy family, just the three of us, but full of love. After my husband left for a younger woman, I had no time to cry. I worked 2 jobs, by day at a grocery store, by night cleaning hospital rooms. I remember the late shifts, the disinfectant soaking into my hands, and thinking, as long as Lauren and Tyler get a proper education, it's all worth it. Lauren was the good student, the one with kind words. I sold my wedding ring, the last piece of jewelry from happier times, to pay her college tuition. I smiled and said, one day you'll wear another ring, not to recall the past, but to start a future. She hugged me, promising she'd take care of me after graduation. I believed her. Tyler, my only son, had skillful hands and loved cars from the start. When he said he wanted to open a repair garage, I took out a bank loan and mortgaged the old house. I thought, if I push a few more years, he'll have a career. I didn't know that was the moment I signed an open-ended contract of sacrifice. Time passed, and while I lived by a packed work schedule, their calendars began to be empty of me. On holidays they'd say, "Mom, plans changed this year, we're traveling with friends." The first time, I pretended to be cheerful. "Go ahead, I'm fine at home." The second time, I only asked, "When will you be back?" By the third time, I stopped asking. I still cooked full dinners and set 2 extra plates, habits of a mother who hadn't caught up to the fact that her kids had grown. Year by year, those plates stayed spotless from start to finish, because no one sat down. On my birthday, Lauren sent one single text, a cake emoji, a heart, no message, no call. I stared at it, imagining her face as she hit send, probably just a few seconds between a meeting or lunch with coworkers. Tyler was worse, he forgot. 3 days later, when I texted, "How are you?" he replied with 3 words. "Very busy, Mom." I asked myself, when did I slip out of their frame? Was it when they got their own homes, their own families? Or when I stopped answering loan requests and started saying no? I remember Lauren once came over, hugged me tight, and said she urgently needed $500 to pay the electric bill. I pulled out the cash, even though I had a little over $600 in my wallet. She promised to pay it back by the weekend. That weekend came and went, then the next month, then the next year, the promise buried under silence. Tyler was the same. Whenever the garage struggled, he'd call, "Mom, I just need a little. You understand?" I understood, and I gave. Until one day, I opened my expense notebook and saw a total that stunned even me, over $70,000 in 4 years. I gave a sad smile. Not because I regretted the money, but because I realized love and trust had been drained. With nothing returned, I started screenshotting every text and saving call logs as a way to keep proof, not to sue, but to remind myself never to forget the truth. I created a folder on my computer called Silent Years. Whenever I felt weak, I opened it and reread each line. "Mom, it's urgent. Just this once. I'm busy. Talk later," and I remembered why I had to be strong. Neighbors sometimes asked, "Haven't seen your daughter visit?" I just smiled. I learned to cushion the question with a smile. Inside, though, each question snipped one more thread tying me to hope. I stopped setting the table for ghosts, stopped calling just to hear a half-hearted voice, stopped waiting for goodnight texts. One summer evening, I watched a travel show about Florida beach homes. The sunset on the screen made me want to live again, not as a forgotten mother, but as a woman who still deserves peace. I opened my computer and created a new folder titled Coast Plan. I wrote out each line. Estimated home price: $300,000. Furniture: minimal, self-decorated. Home insurance: choose expanded safety coverage. Moving costs: $2,500. Emergency fund: $15,000 for legal situations. I wrote with a shaky hand, but each word was a piece of strength I took back for myself. I began selling what I didn't need: the vintage teacup collection, a few old paintings, the armchair my husband used to sit in, posted them all online. The house grew emptier, and strangely, I could breathe better than ever. The more space I cleared, the louder I heard my own voice. "You've endured enough, Josephine." Each morning, I opened the window to sunlight falling on a table set for one. I brewed coffee, watched the steam rise, and whispered, "It's okay. One is enough." Then, on a February night with a soft rain, I stood before the bathroom mirror under the yellow light. The lines by my eyes and mouth, each one a record of a patient year, I touched my cheek and said aloud, as if making a promise to myself, "I will stand by me." That small sound warmed my chest, like someone had opened a door. I slept better that night than I had in years. No more dreaming of a ringing phone, no more waking to phantom chimes. Just rain pattering on the roof, and a peace I'd never known. The next morning, I got up early and mailed my resignation. I decided to sell the old house and move somewhere new, where the past couldn't cling. Inside the envelope, I tucked a small note to myself. "Don't be afraid of losing your children. Be afraid of losing yourself without noticing." From then on, I prepared for freedom. I took 3 months to gather funds, check documents, and sign. No one in the family knew. I no longer felt guilty about keeping a secret. I felt calm, because this time, the secret still belonged to me. Sometimes, Lauren called not to ask how I was, but to share about her husband's promotion or her child's high test score. I listened, nodded, and ended with, "That's wonderful. I'm happy for you." Tyler, whenever money ran short, texted, "Mom, help me one last time." I still replied, "I'm not able to anymore." No anger, no tears, just a deliberate quiet. When everything was ready, I packed. I took only a few books, some old photo frames, and a small notebook scrawled with, "Start again where there's the sound of waves." On the day I left, I didn't leave a message, just a small note on the door. "I'm going to look for what you forgot, peace." And so I left. No fanfare, no one seeing me off. Just me, a suitcase, and a dream that waited half a lifetime. I'd heard people say, everyone has a place meant for them, it's just that not everyone is brave enough to go find it. For me, that place appeared one March morning when I stumbled on a Zillow listing: 2-bedroom wooden house, windows facing the sea, wide porch, to catch the wind, price $299,000. Description: a house for a new beginning. I stopped for a long time. The first photo showed a silver-white house, paint peeling a bit, nestled among green palms, the horizon a deep blue in the distance. A large window faced the ocean, a long wooden porch, and an old rope-hung swing. Something in that image touched me, a peace that felt like I'd lived there in a dream. I called Denise Harper, the agent recommended by an old friend. Her voice was bright and sincere. "Hello, Miss Josephine. If you're truly seeking peace, I think I've found the very house." 2 days later, we met in Street Augustine, the oldest seaside city in America. The sky was glass blue, the wind carried salt and jasmine. Denise arrived with her blonde hair tied up, a white linen dress, and a small ring of keys. "Are you running away or running toward?" she teased, half serious. I looked out at the sea and smiled. Both. The house sat on a quiet little street paved with coral stone. The walkway was dusted with fine sand, flanked by pink bougainvillea. When Denise opened the door, the smell of salt and old wood rushed in, as if the house had its own soul. Light poured through the big window, scattering on floating dust like the sun lived with me. "This belonged to an elderly couple," Denise said, opening each window to let the wind in. "They moved to live with their daughter in Maine. Paperwork's clean, just need a roof and foundation check." I walked slowly through the living room. Chestnut-colored walls, bright floors. From the kitchen corner, you could see the outline of the surf, the thing I'd dreamed of for years. Under the stairs, a little shelf still held one old novel, The Old Man and the Sea. I smiled. Maybe that was a good sign. Denise led me to the porch. "I think you'll like this most." She pushed the door open, and there was a vast stretch of blue. The wind tossed my hair, the surf rolled, gulls cried far away. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, it felt like I'd just found my real heartbeat. "Miss Josephine?" Denise said softly. I opened my eyes. "I want to buy." Denise looked slightly surprised. "No more time to think?" I shook my head. "I've been thinking my whole life." We sat at the porch table to go over the steps. Denise called in an appraiser to check the roof, foundation, electrical, and plumbing. Everything was solid, just needed a few paint touch-ups and a glass pane replaced. I made the deposit that day. When I wired $300,000, my hand trembled. It was the money I once meant to leave for later. To my kids, like so many American mothers who believe their children deserve an inheritance. But now I understood. If you don't live fully while you are alive, leaving any amount behind is pointless. I wanted my later to start right now. That evening, I went back to a small motel. Wind rattled the finest window. The sound of waves tapped a far-off rhythm. I looked at the transfer receipt stamped "completed" and exhaled. I texted Denise, "Thank you. I'm not buying a house today. I'm buying myself back." She replied with a single heart emoji. I didn't tell Lauren or Tyler. For the first time in 40 years of being a mother, I had a secret I didn't share. Not because I feared objections, but because I wanted to keep a piece of life that wouldn't be judged. Before finalizing the paperwork, I sent everything to Maya Chen, the young attorney who had helped me set up documents to protect seniors' rights. She reviewed the purchase contract, then nodded slightly. "This house is in your name. No one can touch it unless you sign. But I recommend creating a living trust to protect the asset if anything unexpected happens later." I agreed. Maya helped me open a separate account, clearly stating, "The ultimate beneficiary will be chosen by me when I want, not when someone forces it." She also advised me to invest in security. I bought a 4-camera system with 90-day cloud storage mounted at the front door, back door, porch, and kitchen. Not because I feared burglars, but because I feared the uninvited return of those who once treated me like a place to take from. I wrote down all necessary contacts on a list called Emergency Contacts 1. Denise Harper, Realtor and new friend. A2. Maya Chen, Attorney, Legal Contact. And 3. Dean Morales, Deputy County Sheriff, whom I know from volunteering at the Women's Association. 4. Dr. Mary Goldberg, family doctor who understands my health. I printed the list, laminated it, and stuck it behind the front door. Everything was organized and logical, as if I were rewriting my life from the beginning, but this time in my own handwriting. On key handover day, Denise drove over to pick me up. She put on some light jazz and said, "I love seeing people find their home." I smiled and answered, "And I love the feeling of not having to explain. When the car turned onto the sandy lane, I saw the house appearing between two rows of palms. Sunlight slanted through the leaves, scattering shimmering patches on the wooden walls like waves. The white door swung open. Wind rushed in, carrying the scent of the sea and of beginnings. I stepped inside, placed my hand on the wood, and felt warmth left by the sun. I spoke softly, almost a whisper. "From now on, I belong here." Denise laughed. "And this house has the owner it deserves." We opened the windows to let the breeze pass through every room, brushing away old dust. Denise helped me set the table again and hang a nameplate, "Josephine's house," by the door. She said, "Every house has its own soul. You just need to give it breath." In the afternoon after she left, I sat on the porch and watched the sunset slide down the water. I turned on the old radio. The previous owners left. Frank Sinatra drifted softly. The sea wind slipped through my hair, reminding me of evenings when I was young and believed peace existed only in songs. But now I knew. It was truly here, all around me. I brewed a cup of tea, set it on the railing, and gazed out. The sea poured gold, birds gliding by and leaving thin black strokes like memory. I said quietly to myself, "All right, Josephine, you finally came home." That first night, I put on fresh sheets, turned off the lights, and left the window cracked for the breeze. The waves were steady like a lullaby. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I didn't dream of a ringing phone. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the big window, lighting the dry salt streaks on the railing. I made coffee and sat on the porch steps, watching fishermen haul their nets in the distance. No traffic noise, no city sounds, only wind and sea and me. I opened my laptop and created a new folder, "New Chapter." Inside it, I wrote the first line. Today, I officially stepped into the rest of my life, not to wait for anyone, but to live. I saved it, closed the laptop, and looked at the ocean again. The water shone like a mirror, reflecting my face, aged, but no longer sorrowful. It was the face of someone newly free. After I moved into the wave-facing house, I thought I was safe enough. But soon I realized peace needs protection too, not with locks, but with clarity. Maya, the young attorney I trusted, called me on a Monday morning. Her voice was firm but warm. "Miss Josephine, now that you have your own home and independent assets, the next step is to make sure that if anything happens, every decision still belongs to you and no one can change it." I stayed quiet for a few seconds, listening to the surf outside the porch. Then I answered, "Go on, Maya." She sent me a list, a new will, medical and financial POAs, powers of attorney, a statement of assets, and even guidance on setting secure bank passwords. "You must designate who's allowed to act on your behalf if you can't sign," Maya said clearly. I knew she meant my children, Lauren and Tyler, those who once used "taking care of Mom" as a banner to seize that power. I said softly, "I won't let anyone decide my life again." 3 days later, Maya came to the house. We sat on the porch while the afternoon light tilted through the palms. She opened her laptop and read each clause: healthcare proxy, Dr. Mary Goldberg, financial agent, Maya Chen, will beneficiary, not disclosed. I signed. The pen moved slow and sure, like carving a vow. From now on, no one could sign for me unless I allowed it. When Maya left, she squeezed my hand. "You did what many can't, setting boundaries with your own family. That's not selfish, it's self-preservation." I nodded, a small but honest smile. That evening, I began standardizing security at home. I ordered a video doorbell that connects to my phone with cloud storage. Dean, the deputy sheriff I know from volunteering with the Women's Association helped me install it. He showed me how to enable motion sensors, change the Wi-Fi password, and create a separate guest password. You'll be surprised, Dean smiled. A lot of asset grab cases start because someone knew the victim's Wi-Fi password. I laughed, never imagining something so small mattered. But inside, I felt grateful to him, a man who speaks little and does much. Dean also suggested a wall safe. He said, "Don't keep everything at the bank. You need a secure spot inside your home." I did exactly that. The safe was mounted behind an old painting in my bedroom. I carefully placed inside my passport, savings book, home purchase documents, insurance policies, and a USB drive with screenshots of texts, call logs, and my bank statements. I photocopied everything in duplicate, one set to Maya, one set for Denise to keep at her real estate office. Denise didn't ask much. She simply rested a hand on my shoulder and said softly, "Stay cautious. Not because you're paranoid, but because they made you be." I went quiet. The truth in that line made my heart sting. A week later, I received a reminder letter for a routine checkup from Dr. Howard Feld, the geriatrician. I proactively added a request for a comprehensive cognitive evaluation. When I said that, "Doctor?" Feld looked at me curiously. I smiled. "Just to make sure I'm sharper than people think." He chuckled and agreed. The assessment lasted over 2 hours. He asked how many words I could recall after 3 minutes, had me redraw shapes, then posed hypothetical financial scenarios. When we finished, he nodded and signed the record. Good cognition, independent reasoning, no signs of decline. I looked at that paper and felt relief. It wasn't just a medical record, it was a legal shield if someone ever tried to claim I was incompetent. But there was something else I needed: inner quiet. I found Dr. Naomi Price, a therapist in town. Her office was small, with landscape paintings and a gentle mint scent. On the very first day, she asked, "What's hardest for you, Josephine?" I answered honestly, saying no to my children. We spoke over many sessions. Dr. Price helped me see that kindness doesn't mean accepting harm. She taught me simple phrases I'd never dared to say. "No, I can't lend you money anymore. No, I don't agree to let you decide for me. No, I need rest. I don't need to keep proving my love." The first time I practiced those words, my throat tightened. But gradually, they grew lighter. "Doctor," Price said, "you're relearning the language of self-respect. It isn't loud, but it carries weight." At the same time, I began archiving every piece of evidence. I made a folder on my computer called "If There's a Case." Inside were screenshots of messages, bank histories, repair invoices, ownership certificates, and weekly backed-up security camera clips. I noted dates, times, and people involved. Not because I wanted a fight, but because I refused to let truth be taken again. I also started a Coast journal. Each morning before coffee, I wrote down one thing I was grateful for. Day 1, I'm grateful I can still hear the waves. Day 10, I'm grateful I've learned to sleep without waiting for the phone. Day 30, I'm grateful I've stopped being afraid. The journal slowly thickened, handwriting slanted, ink in blue and brown, each line a brick I used to build my peace. I also formed a morning walk habit. At 5:30, before sunrise, the wind tasted salty, and the sand was still cold. I walked the shoreline, counting waves instead of promises. They say the waves are never the same, yet they always return just like me. Even pushed far, I still found my way back to myself. Sometimes I met neighbors exercising, Mr. Martin walking his dog, Miss Ruth picking shells. We greeted one another, then quietly watched the sea. Few words were needed, just the sense that each of us was seeking our own peace. After a few weeks, I noticed my phone rang less. Lauren stopped calling often. Tyler sent one text asking if, "You still have your savings?" I replied, "I'm fine, don't worry." That was it. No more, no explanations. I wasn't a 24/7 switchboard for my kids anymore. Instead, I started caring for myself in the simplest ways. Every morning, I swam not in a warm pool, but in the real ocean, where the cold water numbed my skin. At first, I only waded near shore, water to my knees. Then, day by day, I went farther. The cold sliced like a blade, yet each swim felt like my brain rinsed away old memories. I called it my neural rebirth therapy. "Doctor," Price said, "you've found your own way back to life." In the evenings, I wrote my monthly plan: renew home insurance, update account passwords, send thank you, notes to Denise and Dean, water plants, replace porch bulbs. Each bullet was small, but for me it was how I maintained sovereignty over my life. No one did those things for me anymore, and no one was allowed to take away that sense of control. One late night, while I was folding a blanket, the phone rang. Unknown number. I picked up and heard a man. "Mrs. Josephine Myers? I'm with the insurance company. We need to verify ownership of the house in street." Augustine. I paused for a few seconds, then smiled. "I'm the homeowner. I have all documents. Tell me what you need, and I'll send it immediately through my attorney." The line went silent for a few beats, then disconnected. "Do you have a mother or father living alone?" After the line, "I'll send it through my attorney." What else do you think they should prepare? Share what you've experienced in the comments. Your story might help protect someone else's peace. I sat on the sofa and felt my heart beat slow and steady. No more shaking. No more fear. I realized, when you prepare thoroughly, others run out of chances. That night, I went out to the porch and watched the moon rise over the ocean. Silver light stretched like a giant mirror. I poured a small glass of wine, raised it, and whispered, "To a new Josephine, who knows how to say no, how to keep quiet, and how to believe she deserves peace." The wind moved through the porch carrying salt and warm wood. In the dark, I felt safer than ever. 3 quiet weeks passed, as if the sea conspired with me, keeping all secrets in its waves. Every morning, I still walked the sand with a small notebook to write that day's gratitude. My life was simple, almost meditative. Morning coffee, a few lines in my journal, sunlight through the window, the mingled scents of salt and wood. I began to believe that Lauren and Tyler had stopped caring, or at least stopped trying to interfere. But on a Friday afternoon, the phone rang. Lauren's name appeared on the screen. My heart slowed a beat. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Her voice floated in smooth as honey, sweet to the point of counterfeit. "Mom, where are you? I miss you so much." Those 3 words, "miss you so much," fell light as feathers, but I heard the metal hidden inside. I leaned back and kept my tone even. "You miss me? It's been 3 weeks without a single text, and today you suddenly miss me?" Lauren gave a strained laugh. "I know. I was wrong. But I've been so busy, Mom. Where are you living? I'll drive over. I just want to see you." I was silent a few seconds, then asked, "Who gave you my address?" There was a pause. Very short, but enough for me to understand. Well," a neighbor said. "They saw you move. I just want to make sure you're okay." I pressed my lips together. A clumsy answer, and I marked it red in my mind. No one in the old neighborhood had this address. I'd carefully erased every trace, which meant someone had been digging. I said quietly, "I'm fine, Lauren, thank you. But today I'm busy another time." "That's okay, Mom," she said, too fast and too bright. "I'm already on my way. You'll be happy to see us." I looked at the phone after she hung up, the black screen reflecting my face calm but taut as a wire. The sea wind kicked up, carrying the damp smell of rain. I opened the security camera app and checked every angle. Green indicators glowed steady. The images were clear. Front gate, porch, living room, kitchen. The mics were live, everything under control. I texted Maya quickly. My daughter called. She has the address. Bad feeling. In under a minute, a new message popped up. Don't let them in. Dean and I are on our way. I breathed deep. Each breath tasted of salt, fear, and resolve mixed together. About 40 minutes later, an engine sounded on the road. I stepped onto the porch. A shiny black SUV stopped at the gate the kind people rent when they've got big business to do. The door opened. Tyler got out first, shirt buttoned to the top, eyes sweeping the yard, appraising every square foot. Lauren followed with a large handbag, heels sinking slightly into the sand. Finally, a stranger appeared. Gray suit, crisp tie, glossy black briefcase. I stood still on the porch, hands loosely clasped. Lauren smiled, a cut-and-paste smile from a Happy Family commercial. "Mom, oh my God, you really live here? It's beautiful, the ocean right behind the house." Tyler didn't smile. He just scanned around, eyes passing over the porch and windows before landing on the wooden sign by the door. Josephine's house. He muttered, almost under his breath, "It's definitely worth it." Neither of them hugged me, no touch, no, "How are you, Mom?" Only eyes measuring in dollar signs. The man stepped onto the porch and held out his hand. "Hello, Mrs. Myers. I'm Victor Hale, your children's attorney." I shook it with just enough pressure. "Attorney?" Lauren cut in, sugar sweet. "Don't misunderstand, Mom. He's here to help organize your paperwork so you can feel secure. You know you forget things, we worry." A shiver ran through me. The way she said, "You forget things," light, natural, as if rehearsed. Victor opened his case and took out a stack of papers. Crisp white sheets, neatly aligned, clipped with a silver binder. "This is a proposal to set up a trust managed by your children. It ensures your assets are protected and no one can take advantage of you. All spending would be co-supervised by them, so you can live here worry-free." I looked him in the eye and asked slowly, "And if I don't agree?" He gave a thin smile in true lawyer fashion. "Oh, that's fine. We're just presenting it. The decision is entirely yours." I glanced at Lauren and Tyler. Lauren avoided my eyes. Tyler stared straight back, cold as stone. I asked, "Where were you when I needed you? When I was sick? When I was abandoned? When I sold my wedding ring to pay Lauren's tuition? When I mortgaged the house to help Tyler open a garage?" No one answered. Only silence and waves hitting the pilings as if underlining every word. I walked slowly to the porch table and pointed at the chairs. "Sit, but I won't be serving tea." Lauren frowned slightly. "Mom, we're just trying to help." I smiled, calm to the point of frightening. "Really? Then sit and help me look at the ceiling." All three followed my gaze. On the ceiling, the security camera glowed green and the mic blinked. Victor blinked and took a half step back. Lauren started to speak, but I cut in. "Yes, that camera records video and audio. Everything you say today will be stored for 90 days in the cloud, auto-backed up every 24 hours. I saw Lauren's hand tremble, and Tyler turn away, hiding his unease under a mocking look. "Camera? You don't trust us, Mom?" I answered softly. "No. I've just learned to trust evidence more than words." The air thickened. Victor cleared his throat and tried to recover his professional tone. "Mrs. Myers, nothing serious. We just want you to feel at ease." I looked at him with a smile as cool as glass. How strange, no one has ever made me more uneasy than someone trying to help me feel at ease. At that moment, a car horn sounded on the road. I recognized the engine. Dean Morales's pickup turned onto the sandy lane. Headlights swept across the porch. At the same time, Maya stepped out of the passenger seat in a long coat, carrying a document case. Lauren jumped to her feet, surprise flashing in her eyes. "Mom, you called a lawyer?" I stayed seated and said, "No, she came because I have an appointment." Dean stepped onto the porch, voice steady. "Is there a problem here, Mrs. Myers?" Victor tried for polite. "Just a civil discussion, officer." Maya opened her case and pulled out a packet. What a coincidence! I brought copies of Mrs. Myers's new will and POAs, notarized and filed with the county court. Just to avoid misunderstandings. I watched both my children's faces change. Tyler frowned and clenched his fist. Lauren tried to smile, but her voice shook. "Why would you do this, Mom?" "We're only afraid someone will trick you," Maya answered for me. "It's wonderful you're concerned, but your mother hasn't been tricked. She's simply done allowing anyone to exploit her." Dean walked a slow circle, casually eyeing the SUV. The license plate caught the afternoon light, another county. He spoke slowly. "If the three of you have no specific purpose beyond a wellness visit, I suggest you leave before dark. The coastal road isn't easy to drive at night." The words were gentle, but it was an order that didn't need repeating. Victor nodded, trying to stay polite. "We'll come back. Later, when Mrs. Myers is ready to talk." "Oh, I'm ready," I said. "I just don't say what you want to hear anymore." They went quiet and gathered their papers. Lauren put a hand to her chest, her voice breaking. "Mom, you've changed so much." I looked her in the eyes. "No. I've just gone back to being myself." As the SUV rolled out the gate, I watched without feeling hurt. Only a light emptiness remained. Like after you clear out an old room and realize the wind can finally come in. Maya sat beside me and poured some water. Dean leaned against the porch rail, eyes still on the sea. "You did very well," Maya said softly. I shook my head. "No, they'll be back. My kids don't give up that easily." Maya looked at me, serious. "Then next time, we'll have more evidence." "You're not alone." I looked up at the ceiling. The camera light stayed green, loyal and silent. Outside, the waves hit the shore, steady as the ocean's warning. "The storm isn't over, Josephine. Be ready." And I knew exactly right. The real battle had only just begun. I used to think nothing hurts more than betrayal. But today I understand. Worse than betrayal is when the betrayer still calls you Mom. The next afternoon, just as I expected, the black SUV reappeared. This time there were no smiles, no sugar-coated voices, only the impatience of people trying to close a deal. I opened the door without inviting them in, but they stepped onto the porch as if the place were theirs. Lauren held the same stack of papers, voice trying to stay soft. "Mom, I just want to be clear. This isn't coercion. It's simply a way to make sure you're properly cared for." I leaned on the doorframe. Light off the water lit her hair, but her face darkened with tension. Behind her, Victor Hale, the family attorney they'd hired, had already opened his briefcase, pulled out a new contract, and set it on the porch table like a finely woven net. "I," called Maya. She arrived soon after with her laptop and a look I trusted more than any document. "Let me read first," she said. Victor smiled, smooth as silk. "Go ahead, we're not hiding anything." Maya read quickly. The deeper she got, the more her brow furrowed. I heard her repeat each clause, as if to make sure I needed no further explanation. If the beneficiary, namely Mrs. Josephine Myers, loses decision-making capacity, authority over assets transfers to co-guardians Lauren and Tyler Myers. Expenses for long-term medical care may include selling the primary residence to cover costs, and all actions are deemed lawful so long as they are in the best interest of the ward. The wording was cold as steel, wrapped in pristine paper. Maya looked up, straight at Victor. "So if she signs, you can sell this house without her consent simply by labeling it medical expenses. Am I correct?" Victor gave a thin smile. "Of course, but that would only happen if she's no longer competent." Lauren cut in, sharp. "We're just being cautious. This is our inheritance. Mom, you don't need to worry about it." I looked at my daughter. For a second I saw the little girl who once ran through the house to show me her first drawing. Now the woman in front of me talked about inheritance while her mother was still alive. I answered slowly, one word at a time. "Money that belongs to me while I'm alive is not inheritance. It's work, blood, and time. And it's still flowing in me." The porch went silent. Only the waves hit the pilings steady, strong, and sure. Victor slipped back into his smooth negotiator's tone. "Mrs. Myers, we're not trying to make things hard. Sign. And in return, your children promise to call every week and visit often. It's a win-win." I laughed once hoarse and short like ice clinking in a glass. "You're bribing me with affection? Trading a few phone calls for my right to be a person?" Victor hesitated, and Lauren lowered her head to avoid my eyes. Dean, still by the window, tracking every move, spoke in a calm, firm voice. "Mrs. Josephine Myers is the lawful owner of this home. I've checked the county land records. Any attempt to coerce, threaten, or trick her into signing falls under elder protection violations. And I should note, this entire conversation is being recorded on camera." Victor's expression shifted, then he forced himself to stay composed. "No one's coercing anyone, we're just concerned." Tyler shot to his feet, growling. "Mom's not in her right mind if she thinks this is okay. Who hides money in a house from her own kids? We just want to manage it so she doesn't have to worry." I looked at my son, eyes bloodshot, not from love but from anger. I pulled the cognitive assessment from Dr. Feld out of my bag and held it out to him. "Here. Dr. Howard Feld, geriatric specialist, signed. Results: good cognition, independent reasoning, no signs of decline. If you still doubt me, I'll test again, but this time you come with me, so we can see who's more blind." Tyler crushed the paper in his fist, face reddening. Lauren tugged his sleeve, whispering, "Stop." He yanked away and slammed the paper onto the table. "Fine, play it your way. But don't think we'll stand by forever." I looked at Victor, who quietly tucked the contract back into his case, eyes cold and calculating. He knew he couldn't win today, but that look, part arrogance, part warning, said this fight wasn't over. Before leaving, Lauren turned back. "Do you really want to cut us off, Mom?" I answered softly, without a trace of anger. "No, I just want to cut off anyone who treats me like a walking wallet." Lauren bit her lip and turned away. The black SUV backed out, tires grinding through the sand, leaving deep, crooked ruts like torn promises. When they were finally gone, I stood on the porch and listened to wind whistle through the cracks. The sky shifted to dusk, half light, half dark, the same conflicted color as the kinship laid bare before me. Maya packed the documents, sliding their contract into an evidence envelope. "Do you want me to file this with the court now?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not yet. They'll be back, and next time we need them to reveal everything themselves." Maya nodded, understanding. Dean stepped closer, voice low. "You did well, but I'm afraid next time they won't come with just paperwork." I looked at him and smiled wryly. "Then I won't have just paperwork either." He smiled, tilting his head. "You really are a woman of strategy." After they left, I locked the door and drew the curtains. The house went quiet, only wind thudding against the window frame. I poured a glass of water and sat, hands wrapped around it for warmth. I looked around the wall clock. the little cactus, the lamp glow on a black and white photo of me when I was young. Everything was calm, only my heart still trembled, not from fear, but from the sorrow of seeing the truth stripped bare. "Conditional family," I murmured, the words falling into the air like a cruel definition. I once believed love was unconditional. But today I saw clearly. For many, family lasts only until they get their signature on your assets. I set the glass down. My hands still shook a little. Not from weakness, but the last tremor of someone slipping free of fear. I opened my laptop and backed up the footage into the folder. If there's a case. New file name. Trust. Fraud. Recording. 1. MP. 4. I attached a note with the date, time, and attendees. A small but sturdy system like a fence I built around my heart. Outside, the wind rose. Waves pounded the shore, white and relentless. I looked out the window and said quietly, "Peace isn't the absence of storms, it's learning to stand steady in them." I smiled, then lifted the stated, "Water replacing tremor, replacing prayer. Thank you for letting me not sign today." A month after the day I refused to sign, I thought things had settled. But peace, so I learned, is never a free gift. It's envied, especially by those who share your blood. That morning, while I was watering the porch flowers, the mailman stopped. He joked with a smile, "Looks like you're famous, Mrs. Myers, court mail addressed just to you." I couldn't smile back. A chill ran down my spine when I saw the thick envelope stamped by the street. Johns County Court. I carried it inside, sat at the table, letter opener shaking in my hand, white paper, black print. Neat, cold, petition to declare incapacity and appoint legal guardians, Lauren Myers and Tyler Myers. I read it twice. Every word thudded against my heart. My children didn't just want the assets. They wanted to strip me of personhood. I picked up the phone and called Maya. Her voice came quick and firm. "Don't panic, Miss Josephine. We won't play defense, we'll counterattack." That afternoon, Maya came over. She didn't wear her usual black suit, just a white blouse and hair in a neat bun. On the table, a new stack of files. Copy of the petition. Notice of hearing. Hearing date, the 12th of next month. She set a hand on the file, calm voice, eyes bright as flame. "We won't wait to be interrogated. We'll prove you're fully competent and that the ones claiming to care for Mom are angling for her property." I nodded, though my throat felt tight. "Where do we start, Maya?" She pulled a notebook and read quickly. "We need witnesses, medical records, and social proof. I'll make a list." Then she wrote, clear line by clear line. 1. Denise Harper, the realtor, confirming the home purchase was entirely lawful and you decided every detail yourself. 2. Deputy Sheriff Dean Morales, witness to pressure and threats from the children. 3. Dr. Howard Feld, cognitive assessment proving no decline. 4. Dr. Naomi Price, therapy report confirming full emotional stability. The home purchase was a proactive, healthy decision. 5. Former neighbors, to testify that the children neglected their mother for years. I looked at the list and felt a little lighter. It wasn't a one-woman fight anymore. 3 days later, I met Dr. Feld again. He greeted me with a kind smile. Maya told me about the suit. "Don't worry, we'll do this by the book." This time he ordered the full battery: short-term memory, verbal response, reasoning, reaction time, spatial awareness. 2 hours of focused work. When we finished, he peered over his glasses. "Miss Josephine, I see many people your age, but few keep this level of sharpness." "I'll sign the statement. No signs of cognitive decline." I thanked him and shook his hand, as if reclaiming a piece of dignity. It wasn't just a medical form, it was an ID card for my self-trust. The next day, I saw Dr. Naomi Price. Same office, mint scent, a seascape across from the chairs. I told her about the petition. She shook her head. There's a name for what you're going through. Gaslighting of the elderly. When family tries to make a senior doubt her own memory. I gave a dry chuckle. My grandchild would call that modern family care. She laughed, then turned serious. I'll write the report. You're fully stable, fully capable, and your actions buying a home, planning, installing security are proactive decisions, not outside influence. I nodded, knowing that report would be the softest, sharpest weapon. That night at home, I stood before the mirror. A 67-year-old woman stared back, no makeup, but steady eyes. Maya had advised, "You need to rehearse answers to their lawyers' questions. No emotion, no arguing. Each answer one breath long. Cut out words they can twist." I practiced, "Mrs. Myers, do you remember how much you transferred? To your son?" "I remember each amount, and I have the statements." "Did you ever forget to pay a bill?" "No. All payments are automatic. I set them up." "Do you ever feel disoriented or lose track of time?" "No. I keep a daily journal with exact dates, over and over, until my voice stopped shaking like relearning the native language of reason." In the last week before the hearing, Maya taught me body language. Shoulders back, eyes steady. When attacked, don't respond immediately. Pause 2 seconds, breathe, then answer. If they start yelling, turn to the court and say, "I'll wait until they're calm." She also taught me to rest my hands lightly on the table instead of clenching, to show control. People won't just hear what you say. They'll watch how you exist. I smiled. "You're training me like an actor," Maya replied. "No, I'm teaching you to keep control in the very room where they want to take it away." In the final evenings, I compiled evidence. I printed a 2-year timeline. Calls and texts from them. Only 7. Calls, texts, and transfers from me. Over 200. I clipped them into a blue binder labeled Evidence of Neglect and Financial Abuse. Looking at those numbers, I saw one truth. Real love never needs proof. Exploitation always leaves a trail. The night before the hearing, I didn't sleep right away. I sat on the porch and watched the sea. The water wasn't calm, windy, whitecaps everywhere. I said to myself, tomorrow I won't be a victim. I may be the respondent, but I'm not weak. I'm standing up for my right to decide. I listened to the waves like my own heartbeat. Each surge and fall patient, persistent. I closed my eyes and breathed until fear dissolved like salt in water. Next morning, I woke early. Dawn was still gray. I chose a light gray blouse, soft slacks, flat shoes the color of sand. No jewelry, no necklace, no expensive watch, just a small clip to hold my hair. I wanted to enter the courthouse as myself, unarmored, but unbowed. Before leaving, I paused to look around walls, windows, stripes of light through the curtains. I whispered, "Don't worry, little house. I'll protect you and myself." Then I shut the door. The lock clicked small sound, but it rang like an oath. Dean waited by the car. Maya sat up front with the case on her lap, eyes intent. "Ready?" she asked. I smiled and fastened my seatbelt. Yes. Time to learn the art of being a defendant without lowering my head. The car rolled slowly along the coastal road. The sun edged up behind the palms, light flaring in the rearview mirror. I saw my face there, old but bright, tired but proud. Waves thumped in the distance, singing a quiet encouragement. "Go, Josephine. This time, don't be afraid. You're headed toward your own justice." The street? Johns County courtroom wasn't large, but the air was cold enough that I clasped my hands for warmth. Cream-colored walls, dark benches, and light pouring from high windows made the room solemn and heavy, as if every breath could be recorded. I sat at the defense table beside Maya. She opened the file and nodded to steady me. "Stay calm. Today belongs to the truth," I answered with a small smile, though my heart pounded like surf before a storm. Across the aisle, Lauren and Tyler sat at the plaintiff's table in dark clothes. In front of them sat Victor Hale, the family attorney, with the calm face of a man too used to putting lipstick on lies. When the judge entered, everyone rose. The hearing began. Victor opened, voice precise and sharp like a freshly honed blade. "Your Honor, my client's two devoted children only want to protect their mother. But Mrs. Josephine Myers has acted impulsively, irrationally, and shows severe self-isolation. She liquidated old assets, cut off contact with her children, and handed financial authority to an outsider, a young lawyer she barely knows. We believe she can no longer make reasonable decisions." Each word, impulsive, irrational, unreasonable, was a pebble thrown at my face. I looked down. My hands lay calm on my lap, knuckles white. Victor went on. "Evidence shows that over the past year, she refused to see her children, kept no contact, and displayed troubling behavior installing cameras throughout the home, hiring a personal legal advisor, and recording family members. In our view, these actions stem from a victimization delusion, not sound judgment." Maya didn't interrupt. She waited. And when he finished, she stood, her voice light but clear. "Your Honor, we request to play the video evidence." The judge nodded. Maya signaled the technician. The large screen lit up with the first clip. It was Mother's Day last year. Me in my old kitchen setting 2 bowls of soup, a small mousse cake, and a card still unsigned. Maya spoke evenly. "Your Honor, this was Mother's Day. Mrs. Josephine prepared lunch for her children. The table is empty." And on social media, her daughter posted a photo with the caption, "She zoomed in, with the people who matter most." Silence fell over the room. Lauren lowered her head, face still trying to stay cold. Maya said quietly, "A mother, self-isolating, or abandoned?" She clicked to the next slide. The screen showed 1 year of call and text logs, 4 calls from Lauren, 3 from Tyler, hundreds of unanswered calls and texts from me. "These are their contact frequencies," Maya said evenly. "Who cut off whom?" Victor leaned forward to object. "The court can't judge capacity on personal feelings." "Exactly," Maya replied, eyes flashing. "So we'll let the facts speak." She played the next video. "The confrontation at my house the day Victor, Lauren, and Tyler came demanding I sign the trust." In the clip, Victor's voice rang, "Out, sign it, and in return, your kids promise to call every week." And Lauren's voice wavered, "That's our inheritance money." The courtroom seemed to freeze. I heard my heartbeat pounding in my chest, then looked at Maya. She gave a small nod. She turned to me and signaled. I stood and walked slowly to the witness stand. The light from above was cold and white. My voice was low but steady. "I didn't buy this house to run away. I bought it so I wouldn't be invisible anymore. All my life, I gave to them time, money, love. And when I had nothing left to give, I became a burden. I bought that house to live again, as a person with the right to exist." I paused and looked straight at my 2 children. Both Lauren and Tyler avoided my eyes. Maya called Dr. Howard Feld to the stand. He's nearly 10 years older than me, with the gravelly voice of someone who speaks slowly but surely. I evaluated Mrs. Myers twice within 3 months. Both times showed completely normal cognition, logical thinking, good reaction time, and solid problem solving. There is no medical evidence whatsoever that she lacks capacity. Victor tried to press him. But could she have a mild psychological issue, like anxiety or a delusional belief? Doctor? Feld answered immediately. No. I conducted the evaluation myself. She's clearer than most of her relatives. A soft ripple of laughter went through the room. The judge tapped the gavel. Order. Next was Dr. Naomi Price. She entered with a gentle presence, but her voice could quiet the entire room. Mrs. Josephine Myers came to me to learn how to say no to unreasonable demands. No one is mentally ill just because they want to protect themselves. On the contrary, that's a sign of emotional recovery. Maya smiled, then motioned for the next witness, Denise Harper, the real estate agent. In a light blue suit with her hair pulled back, she spoke clearly. I handled Mrs. Myers's home purchase. She reviewed every detail: foundation, electrical, property taxes, insurance, maintenance fees. There was no sign of confusion or impulsivity. Every decision was carefully considered, and she signed only after reading each clause. Finally, Deputy Sheriff Dean Morales took the stand. In uniform, he moved slowly but with authority. During my role as witness and security support, I found no sign of fraud. What I did observe was psychological pressure from the two adult children, including threats, insults, and attempts to force a signature. Victor sat silent, gripping his pen. Lauren exhaled hard, and Tyler kept his head down, avoiding the judge's eyes. Maya rose, closed the file, and her voice rolled out steady, each word as clear as waves breaking on rock. Your Honor, this is not the story of a frail, confused mother. This is the story of an older woman reclaiming her autonomy, and of children trying to use the law to launder their greed. I don't need many words, only to invite the court to look at the screen and ask, who actually needs protection? The courtroom went silent. The judge leaned back, his eyes deep and calm. He tapped the gavel lightly, then said, after reviewing all evidence and testimony, the court concludes there is no basis to declare Mrs. Josephine Myers incapacitated. On the contrary, the plaintiff's conduct shows signs of attempting to exploit an elderly person's property. The petition is denied. The plaintiffs will pay all court costs and are warned that continued harassment may result in criminal charges. The room erupted into a hush. Lauren's breathing turned shallow, Tyler slammed his hand on the table, and Victor bowed his head while hurriedly packing his files. Maya touched my shoulder and whispered, "It's done." I stood, bowed to the judge, and turned to leave. My steps were slow but steady. Sunlight flooded the hallway, washing over my hands still trembling, but now from relief. In my mind's eye, I could still see the Mother's Day table, the empty table. But now I knew. Even if no one sits with me, I can still eat in peace. When I stepped out of the courthouse, I lifted my head. Sunlight spilled across my hair and laid a warm weight on my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt a lifetime's heaviness slide off. Not because I'd won the case, but because I was no longer treated as someone who had to prove she was sane enough to live. Wind blew in from the sea, carrying salt and sap, the scent I call the true smell of freedom. Maya came to me and held me tight. Her voice was small but firm. "Miss Josephine, you chose yourself, and the law stood by you." I didn't answer right away. I just squeezed her hand. Some victories don't need cheering, only a deep breath that tells you no one can shove you out of your own life anymore. Dean waited by the gate with a gentle smile. "Told you. You're too strong for the waves to swallow. Just keep going." I thanked him, then turned toward the sea where sunlight melted into water, glittering like 1,000 tiny hands patting the earth in applause. That evening, I sat on the porch. The sea breeze was salty, threading through my hair, my collar, and my spirit. Moonlight blinked across the water like shards of broken mirrors, quietly beautiful. I put the case file in a drawer and took out a blank sheet of paper. I wrote the first line, "To myself, the one who stood up when others wanted to kneel." I didn't write much. Just a few simple sentences. Thank you for believing in yourself, even when people called you crazy. Thank you for saying no, even while your heart still wanted to be loved. Thank you for choosing to live, not just exist. I folded the letter and tucked it into the coastal journal. It wasn't a thank you to life, it was gratitude to the strong part of me. The part I once buried under useless apologies. 3 days after the ruling, Lauren texted, "Just a few lines. Mom, can we talk? We only want to settle. If you return the house and withdraw the filings, everything will be fine." I read it without anger, only tired. I closed the phone, set it on the table, and stepped onto the porch. The waves kept coming, the sky stayed blue, and I understood. My silence today was the clearest answer. Not because I hate them, but because I've stopped hoping to be loved on their terms. That night, Tyler called. His voice was sharp, rapid. "You think it's over because you won? I'll tell the papers you're senile, so everyone sees how crazy you really are." I listened to all of it without cutting in. Then I answered calmly, "Thank you for calling, and everything you just said is being saved on my server." I heard a hard inhale on the other end, then the line went dead. I set the phone down, no longer shaking like before. Maya once told me, "When people use threats, it means they've lost real power. Your job is not to hand it back." I smiled. "Exactly. I don't need to win by fear. I only need not to bow." The next morning, I took out a few seed packets Denise had sent, coastal wildflowers that need only sun and wind. I rolled up my sleeves and let my hands sink into the damp sand. The earth was cool, comforting. I planted small clusters along the porch, right by the wooden rail. When the wind blew, grains of sand dusted my cheek, and I didn't brush them away. They reminded me I can still feel the world with skin and breath. That afternoon, I stopped by the fishing village for coffee. The owner grinned. "Want the fisherman's style? Salt coffee, bitter, salty, sweet on the finish." I nodded. The first sip made me wince, but then the salt opened into gentle sweetness. I laughed and said, "Just like life. The salt makes you remember the sweet." He nodded. "That's why coastal folk don't fear bitterness. In the end, every salt water finds its way back to the sea." That night, I slept straight through without dreaming of the empty table. No scraping chairs, no waiting for a doorbell that never rings. Only waves steady and kind as a heartbeat. For the first time in years, I didn't dream of anyone coming back. I saw myself on the sand, arms open to the wind. Freedom, it turns out, looks like the wind unseen, but real wherever it touches. One morning, walking the beach, I met Ruth Ellison, the silver-haired woman I'd noticed a few times. She smiled and asked, "Are you Josephine Myers? I read about your case. I felt like I was reading about myself." I was a little surprised. "The article said your children sued you too, right?" she asked. I nodded. She sighed softly. "Me too. But I never dared go to court. I stayed quiet and lost my house." I took her hand. "I'm so sorry, Ruth. But you know, silence doesn't keep anyone. It only keeps the pain." She gave a sad smile, pale blue eyes on the horizon. "I learned that from you. When I read the ruling, I sat up and cried. I wished I'd had your courage." I squeezed her hand gently. "It's never too late to choose yourself." From then on, we started morning coffees. 2 women, 2 wooden chairs, 1 pot of salt coffee. We sat on my porch, listening to the waves, saying things we'd never dared say. Ruth told me about her old marriage, about a son who left at 20. I told her about the years I thought giving more would make them love me back. We didn't complain, didn't cry. We just talked and sometimes sat quietly together. Once, when I said I still write one thing I'm grateful for each day, Ruth smiled. I write one thing I no longer need. Yesterday I wrote, I don't need to prove I'm a good mother. I laughed. Good one. Then today I'll write, I don't need to apologize for protecting myself. One breezy morning, Ruth said something I'll never forget. The wind was strong, the waves loud, but her voice was clear and warm like a prayer. Peace is an asset, Josephine. And the biggest mistake we women make is signing it over to other people. I sat still. Those words fell into my heart like sand, light, but settling deep. I looked out at the sea where the sun was rising, gilding the waves. Yes, peace is not a prize. It's property. And from now on, I'll hold the title in my own hand, no consigning it, no granting it to anyone, Myers or otherwise. I breathed in. The wind filled my lungs salty and clean. Ruth smiled, lifted her salt, coffee, and clinked cups with me. Congratulations, Josephine. We're still alive, and this time we're living for ourselves. I answered with a trembling but warm voice. Yes. This time I'm not just living, I'm truly free. One early summer morning, just as I set the coffee pot on the porch table, a small envelope slid through the mail slot. No return address, only a scrawl on the front. To Grandma. I knew the better. Handwriting, it was Emma's. My 10-year-old granddaughter. Lauren's child. I sat down, hands shaking a little as I opened it. Inside was a purple sheet, the corner creased twice. Grandma, I miss you. Mom says you're busy, but I saw you in the news. I don't understand everything, I just know you're not bad. When I grow up, I want to be like you, able to say no and still be kind. I love you lots. P.S. Do you still have a cat? I read it over and over, each line like a needle touching the softest part of my heart. It had been so long since I cried this time because I saw myself through a child's eyes. I picked up a pen and wrote back right away. Dear Emma, I miss you too. The sea here is beautiful. Every morning the waves run up to say hello. The waves come and go. But the tide always returns like true love, which finds its way back no matter how far it travels. I want to teach you 3 things about self-respect. 1. Never stay silent when your heart says no. 2. Don't believe anyone who calls you selfish for protecting yourself. 3. When others turn away, stand tall. Your straight back helps your head stay high. I don't have a cat yet, but lots of birds sing on my porch every morning. If you visit, I'll tell you all their names. Love, Grandma. I folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and mailed it with careful handwriting. For the first time in months, my heart felt calm as the morning sea, no undertow, just light spread across the water. That evening, Ruth, Denise, and I hosted our first Thursday night book circle. We sat around a small round porch table, each with a dog-eared book and a hot cup of tea. Denise chose The Old Man and the Sea, Ruth brought The Color Purple, and I read a short passage from Maya Angelou's journal. When I read, I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it, Ruth pressed a hand to her heart. That was written for us. Denise smiled. I think it was written for every generation of women who once let others speak for them. We sat quietly, listening to the waves and the night insects riding the breeze. A little later, Maya the young lawyer stopped by with strawberry tarts. She said, half joking, I'm here to make sure you 3 don't start an anti-lawyer league. We laughed out loud. That sound, I realized, was something I hadn't heard in my own home for a long time. From then on, Thursday book nights became a small ritual. We didn't just read, we told our stories. Each of us was an open book, and the only wall left between us was trust. The next morning, I joined the ocean swimming group for seniors. They call themselves the Morning Tide Swimmers. The first lesson wasn't technique, it was breathing longer instead of worrying. The coach, a 75-year-old woman named Nora, said, "People don't drown because of the waves. They drown because they forget to breathe." I took it to heart. Each time the cold water wrapped around me, I inhaled deep, closed my eyes, and felt my body fall into rhythm with the sea. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the deep. I understood that the more you fight, the more you sink, and the more you accept, the more you float. One afternoon, Dean stopped by. He carried a form and a small packet. "I signed you up for the county's Personal Safety for Seniors program. They'll install an emergency app and give you a portable alarm." I teased, smiling. "So you really see me as a senior now?" Dean grinned gently. "No, I see you as someone smart enough to plan ahead." He set up the app, showed me how to toggle it, and how to send my location if needed. Before leaving, he said, "Peace doesn't always come on its own. You have to fence it in." I nodded. I'd learned that, and this time the fence was made of awareness, not fear. The next day, I made clam chowder and brought it to the neighbors, the Carters, the retired couple who helped me move in. "Mrs. Carter was surprised. "You still remember the Northeastern recipe? Goodness, it smells amazing." We ate together and talked about gardens, rain, and the old days. Before I left, she held my hand. "We need you here, truly. Not many like you in this town." I stopped short. "We need you," the words stung my eyes. For years I'd only heard, "We need you for one more thing," and behind that always came money, labor, or sacrifice. Now, for the first time, someone needed me for me. That night I wrote another letter, this one for forgiveness. I wrote to Lauren, to Tyler, and even to Victor. "I forgive you not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." Forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation. It only means I'm no longer carrying you on my back. I didn't send it. I folded it and placed it in the Coastal Journal. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't need a recipient. It just needs the writer willing to let go. The following week, I started a new project, a blog called Coastal Diary at 67. I wrote under my real name. The first post was titled, "Don't Let Anyone Write Your Ending." I told my story, from a mother stripped of control to a woman relearning how to own her breath. No frills, no philosophy, just truth. I didn't expect it to travel so far. Hundreds of comments, most from older folks. I'm 72, and I just said no to my son for the first time. "You made me want to go visit my mother. Thank you for saying what so many of us feel." One morning, someone knocked. A middle-aged woman stood there with a bouquet of lavender. "I'm Emily from the next town," she said, voice tight. "After reading your blog, I went to see my mother, whom I hadn't visited in 2 years. We hugged this morning. Thank you because you reminded me time isn't endless." After she left, I sat down and cried, but not from sorrow. It was the first time I cried because I felt useful. That afternoon, I cleaned a closet and found a spare set of keys, house, safe, back gate. I turned them in my hand, then put them in a small glass jar and labeled it, "Open only when you remember yourself." Not when I forget, but when I remember. Remember how long it took to earn this freedom. I set the jar on a shelf beside an old photo of me and Emma on the beach. 2 faces, one big and one small, both turned to the sea where the waves keep rising, reminding me, anyone can begin again. At any age, no matter the losses. I whispered, a promise to myself. If anyone comes looking for me, they'll find a woman who's living not afraid, not waiting, just breathing. The sea breeze slipped through the window and lifted a note on the table. "Peace is an asset, don't sign it over to anyone." I smiled. Peace, yes, now it looks like me. 2 years passed. I stopped counting by calendars and started counting by the smell of wind and the brightness of morning. The waves out there keep time like a clock, the only thing in my life that has never missed an appointment. The second year, after the trial, is also the second year. I haven't gotten a single call from Lauren or Tyler. No birthday texts, no Christmas greetings, no Mother's Day card. But the strange thing is, I don't fall apart anymore. No more waiting, no more flinching every time the phone rings. I just smile, turn on the oven, and get ready for my own small party, the birthday I throw for my chosen family. That afternoon, the sea-facing house smelled of cinnamon apple pie. Ruth came early with a pot of mint tea. Denise brought a bundle of dried lavender, and Maya arrived a little late, slightly out of breath. Sorry, court ran long this morning, but I brought wine. We put on jazz, opened the porch doors, and let the wind blow through the house. Dean stopped by too, still in uniform, carrying a small cake with a handwritten line, "For the bravest lady in town." I laughed, my voice catching a little. "If you knew how soft I was 2 years ago, you wouldn't call me that." Dean smiled. Brave doesn't mean never weak, it means weak and still moving. We ate, told stories, and laughed, the sound I once thought I'd never have again. No fancy cake, no noisy toasts, just the smell of baking, the sunset light, and 4 friends around a wooden table. I looked around and suddenly realized, this is the real family, the ones not tied by blood but who never leave. That evening, after everyone left, I cleaned the table. Under a dessert plate, I found a small envelope labeled, "From Emma to Grandma." I froze. The postmark was from an elementary school in another city. I opened it and found a small note, written in neater handwriting than before. "Grandma, Mom didn't let me send a gift this year, so I'm writing in secret. When I'm old enough to decide, I'll come visit you. I still remember the way you told me about starfish, and I drew it on the back. I love you so, so much. Emma." I flipped it over and saw a small drawing, 2 people, one big and one small, lying on the sand, looking up at a sky full of stars. In the corner she'd added, "I believe stars still shine even when you can't see them in the daytime." I pressed the letter to my chest. Tears fell, but they were warm not for what was lost, but for knowing something beautiful still exists somewhere, even if not within reach. The next morning, I wrote back to Emma. "My dear Emma, when you look up, you'll see the stars like little beads of memory. I look at that same sky every night. If you come someday, we'll map the stars so we won't lose each other, no matter where we are. Remember, you can love someone without losing yourself. Love, Grandma." I tucked the letter into a small notebook and marked it with a sprig of dried lavender. When she finds her way to me, I'll give it to her, not as an explanation, but as a map to freedom. A few weeks later, Ruth shared big news. "Josephine, I'm moving out on my own." I looked at her and still saw a little worry in her eyes. "I rented a small place at the end of Ocean View. Not far. But I want to cook the first meal in my own kitchen." I was happy for her. And I knew the feeling, equal parts excitement and tremble, like learning to walk after an accident. I helped her make a safety list. Emergency numbers, the door camera spot, the porch light schedule, and regular health checkups. Ruth smiled, half teasing, half touched. "You know, I once thought I couldn't start over, but watching you, I believe I can." I answered softly. "I thought that too. Until the waves taught me everything can change direction." On moving day, I walked her to the door. That night, like always, I sat on my porch and watched the light from her new place flicker in the distance. A small light, but steady proof that some people arrive late in life, but right on time in your heart. A week later, Denise called with news. "House sold, Joe. The buyer's a widow from Maine, also in her 60s. I told her this neighborhood has good neighbors. I smiled. Thank you, kind agent. When the woman moved in, we brought a small lavender plant and set it on her porch. She hugged me and whispered, I used to fear starting alone. But seeing you smile, peace doesn't feel scary anymore. Walking back, Denise said, funny how some houses don't just change owners, they change the air. I nodded. Maybe when someone learns to live true, the place they live warms up too. Time passed, and I agreed to teach a small class at the community center. Property rights and personal boundaries for older adults. Maya suggested it. Just tell your story, no heavy law. They need to hear from someone who lived it. At first I refused, afraid my voice would shake. But that first day, facing a dozen silver heads and curious eyes, I took a deep breath and began, I'm not a lawyer, just someone who nearly lost everything because of the word trust. Trust isn't wrong, what's wrong is trusting without limits. Boundaries don't make us selfish, they make love clean. After class, an elderly man came up and said softly, Ma'am, I'm going home to talk to my son, not to fight, just to talk. Thank you. I smiled. If one story helps one person keep their home, then everything I went through was worth it. That night, I opened an old album. Back then, our family photos always missed someone, the photographer, the angry one, the one avoiding the frame. Now, in the living room, I hung a new picture. Me on the wooden porch, a blazing red sunset behind me, holding a cup of salt coffee. No one cropped out, and no one needed to stand beside me to make happiness. That photo, to me, proves a life can mend. I stood before it and whispered, peace is a decision, not a circumstance. Outside, the waves rose and fell like the earth's heartbeat. I realized the last big wave of my life isn't loss, it's the return of myself. I inhaled and smiled. If someone asked me what happiness looks like, I'd say, it looks like tonight's sunset, no debts owed, only fullness in your chest. One early morning, before sunlight reached the porch, I opened my laptop, set a cup of tea beside it, and wrote the final opening line for my blog. Love isn't measured by waiting, it's measured by the way we live. I read it 3 times. Simple, but it holds everything I learned in 2 years about loss, about boundaries, about loving without losing yourself. I no longer write the blog to tell stories, but to put a clean period at the end of a journey. At the bottom, I introduced something new. A scholarship in my mother's name, Eleanor's Light, for older women starting over, even if it's just a cooking class, driving lessons, or learning to odd upon Eleanor's Light. Use a smartphone. I don't have much money, but enough to start. In the description, I wrote, my mother's light never glittered, but it was bright enough to guide me out of the fog. Now I just want to pass that light on. When the scholarship paperwork was done, Maya called, her voice moved. You know, you didn't just win a case, you changed how people see aging. I laughed. No, Maya, I just learned to live, not wait. On my front door, I taped a small note in blue ink. Not for sale, not for rent, not negotiating, only coffee. Half joke, half true. Plenty of people have tried to buy my beach house, offering twice the price. Some even pitched turning it into a homestay. I only smiled. This house isn't for business. It's the rest of my heart, and I won't slice it up. Every morning, I brew a pot of coffee, open the porch, and let the aroma ride the sea breeze. People say coffee smells like memory, but to me, it's the scent of freedom chosen. That afternoon, I sat on the porch and listened to the waves. The sound hadn't changed, but I had. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and said softly, "Thank you to the version of me who turned her back on silence. I used to fear the silence between calls that never came. Now I know silence isn't scary, it's only scary when you don't use it to hear yourself." I opened my notebook and wrote on a new page. If they call someday, I'll open my heart, but with clear boundaries. I can forgive, but I won't trade peace for kinship again. Boundaries, in the end, aren't walls, they're maps that keep us from losing ourselves. That autumn, I turned 69. No flowers, no gifts, just wind and laughter. Dean brought a small plant and said, "It's called Wind's Whisper. It blooms only when the soil is watered steadily and the grower isn't in a hurry." I smiled. Sounds like me, doesn't it? Nearly 70 years to bloom one season of peace. We sat, together without many words. Ruth came with apple tart, and Denise swung by late with fresh-cut lavender. We didn't call it a party, just an ordinary afternoon where everyone could be themselves. That night, I went to the beach. The water reflected the moon, rippling like a silver ribbon. I lit a small candle, set a cup of tea on the porch, and invited the wind in my little ritual of making peace with life. No music, no incense, just wind and salt. I closed my eyes and saw myself clearly, not the mother cut out of the frame, but the person standing in the center of her own picture. Quietly, like a thank you, I said, "Thank you, because I'm still here. And I live." If my story reaches you, maybe it's because you carry a piece of me too, the one who loved hard, endured in silence, and finally learned to stand on her own side. I want to ask, where are you listening from? A small house by a lake? An apartment in the city? Or somewhere you're learning to begin again? Leave a comment and tell me about a time you chose yourself, even if it was just saying no to what was hurting you. If this story helps you, please like and subscribe so more older people can find a way out the way we did. Thank you for your time. I don't know who you are, but I know we just shared the same breath. The breath of people who chose peace over fear. I truly appreciate you. Night fell, and the wind poured into the house with the smell of salt and a strange warmth. I stood, gently closed the blog, and turned off the living room light. By the window, the wind's whisper trembled. The moon still shone, the waves still sang, and I, the woman once labeled incapacitated, now have only one thing left to lose: fear. I sat down, took the last sip of tea, and spoke aloud my farewell to the past. I live. I don't wait. I was standing in the kitchen when I heard a heavy sound echoing from the lake behind the house. A dull, hollow thump, unlike anything familiar I had ever heard. When I stepped out onto the porch, my daughter-in-law's car was speeding away through a cloud of dust, the trunk still wide open. On the surface of the lake, something dark was tilting, rising and sinking very slowly, as if there were air trapped inside it. I didn't know what it was. I only knew it was too heavy to be thrown away casually, and too rushed to ignore without looking back. I stood frozen for a few seconds, then heard a very faint sound, not clearly water sloshing, not clearly anything else, just something being pressed from the inside. I ran down to the lake, not because I was certain, but because if I had turned my back at that moment, I probably would have never slept peacefully again for the rest of my life. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Ilara Whitcomb, 64 years old. I live alone in an old wooden house right beside a small crater lake on the southern edge of Oregon, where winters are long, summers are quiet, and people my age are often advised to slow down. Slow down. I had been slowing down for 7 months, ever since the day they called me at 3 a.m. and told me my son, Nathaniel, had died in a car accident on the highway. I don't remember how long I sat motionless in the kitchen that day. I only remember the steady ticking of the wall clock and how cold the coffee pot on the stove had become. So cold that when I touched it, I flinched from the chill. Nathaniel was my only child. I gave birth to him when I was 39, an age when doctors looked at me with concern back then. But Nathaniel came into my life like a late blessing, and I spent nearly the rest of my life revolving around him. He grew up by this lake. He fished with me from the old wooden dock. He sat on the porch reading books on summer afternoons. And then he grew up, moved away, studied mechanical engineering in Portland, and married Lysan, the woman who, from the first moment I met her, gave me a feeling I never quite knew how to name. Not dislike, not exactly suspicion, just cold. Lysan was always polite, too polite. Her smile was always measured, her voice always controlled, her eyes always seemed to be calculating something behind them. I never had proof that she was a bad person, but I also never once felt truly at ease around her. After Nathaniel's funeral, the relationship between Lysan and me nearly froze solid. She came to my house exactly twice to collect her husband's belongings. The first time, she was silent. The second time, irritated. Not a single question, not a single tear. Then she disappeared from my life, just as Nathaniel had disappeared from this world, until that afternoon. I stood on the porch, watching Lysan's car vanish down the winding dirt road. My heart was pounding so hard my ears rang. An open trunk is not a small thing. No one drives with their trunk open unless they are panicked, or in such a rush they don't bother checking behind them. I turned back toward the lake. The object had drifted a little farther out, but it hadn't fully sunk yet. It didn't float upright like a log, and it wasn't flat like an empty container. It tilted awkwardly, heavy as if struggling between staying afloat and being pulled under. A light breeze rippled the water, and then I heard that sound again. Not clearly, not loud enough to be called a cry, just something faint, like air being forced through a narrow gap. My heart clenched. "Ilara, you're imagining things," I told myself. At my age, it's easy to let your mind run wild. I had lost my son. I lived alone. I heard a noise, saw a suitcase, and my brain immediately tried to connect everything into a horrifying story. But my hand stayed locked around the porch railing. I looked around. No one. No birds. No engine noise anymore. Just the lake and that dark object. I called out Lysan's name. "Lysan." My voice sounded weak in the empty air. No answer. I called again, louder. "Lysan." Still nothing. I stepped off the porch. The wet grass made my shoes slip slightly. My legs were shaking. I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or from a fear that hadn't fully taken shape yet. When I reached the water's edge, I realized the object was no longer drifting. It was starting to sink, little by little, slowly but surely. Without thinking further, I hiked up my skirt and stepped into the lake. The water was brutally cold, soaking through my thin socks, biting into my skin like needles. I gasped, trying to keep my balance. The mud beneath the surface was soft and slick, making every step difficult. When my hand touched the object, I shuddered. Leather, not metal, not plastic. Leather, a suitcase. Dark leather, old, its surface wrinkled from the water. It was unbearably heavy. I had to use both hands, straining to pull it toward shore. My shoulders screamed with pain. My back felt like it might snap. "No, no, no," I muttered, not even sure what I was pleading for. Then I heard it, clearer than before. A very small sound, very weak, like someone inhaling, then not having the strength to exhale. I almost let go. My heart raced wildly. My throat burned dry. I dragged the suitcase onto the shore, letting it rest on the wet gravel. Water streamed out through the seams. I knelt in front of it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the zipper. "Ilara, stay calm," I whispered to myself. "You don't know anything yet." But I did, not logically, instinctively. I pulled the zipper. It stuck. I yanked harder. It tore open with a harsh screech. The smell hit me first, dampness, lake water, and something else. Something I recognized from years ago when I was a young mother, the smell of milk. The suitcase opened. In that moment, my world stopped. Inside was a newborn baby, wrapped in a thin blanket soaked through. Its skin was pale, its lips were blue, its eyes were tightly shut. So small it felt like my heart was being crushed. I reached out and touched its chest. Cold. Far too cold. I pressed my ear down. At first I heard nothing. 1 second, 2, then a faint breath. Almost non-existent. But there. "Oh my God," I gasped, tears spilling uncontrollably. "No, this can't be." I lifted the baby. It was so light it terrified me, like I was holding something that could disappear at any moment if I loosened my grip. I stood up, unsteady. My legs ached, but I felt none of it. I knew only one thing. This child was still alive. The baby was so light that I was afraid if I breathed too hard, it would dissolve in my arms. I stood frozen for a few seconds by the lake, my mind blank, but I didn't faint the way I always imagined someone would in a situation this horrifying. Maybe because the fear was too specific, too real for my body to allow collapse. I didn't have that right. Not now. I pulled the wet blanket tighter around the baby and pressed it against my chest. The small, freezing body against my clothes made me shiver, but it also snapped me back into reality. It was breathing, weakly, unevenly, but breathing. That alone was enough to make me start running. I don't remember exactly how I ran from the lake back to the house. I only remember gravel cutting into my feet, wet grass clinging to my skirt, and my heartbeat pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. I didn't dare look too closely at the baby's face. I was afraid if I did, I would see something that would steal my courage. So I focused on the path ahead, each step, each familiar stretch of ground leading back to the old wooden house. When I pushed open the kitchen door, the room felt terrifyingly quiet. The wall clock was still ticking steadily, as if the world had no idea a life was hanging by a thread. I set the baby down on the kitchen table and swept everything aside. Dishes, old newspapers, a dried flower vase, everything clattered to the floor. I didn't care, I just needed a flat surface. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to take several deep breaths before I could dial the phone. I called 911. Part of me was afraid I wouldn't be able to speak, that my voice would break into meaningless sounds. But when the calm voice of the dispatcher came on the line, something in me latched onto that steadiness like a lifeline. 911, what is your emergency? I found a baby, I said, my voice rough. A newborn. It was in the water. It's very cold. Where are you located? The voice asked, not raising her tone. I gave my address slowly, carefully, as if saying a single word wrong would cause everything to collapse. I heard typing on the other end. "An ambulance is being dispatched," she said. "Now I need you to follow my instructions, okay?" I nodded instinctively, then realized she couldn't see me. "Okay," I said. "Please, hurry." "Place the baby on a dry, flat surface," she instructed. "If the clothes are wet, remove as much as possible and use dry towels to dry the baby. Do you have towels?" I looked around as if my familiar kitchen had suddenly become foreign. "Yes," I said, then ran to the bathroom, grabbing every clean towel I could find. I rushed back, knelt by the table, and began drying the baby with movements that were clumsy and desperate. Its skin was so cold I had to bite my lip to keep from sobbing. I wiped its chest, its tiny arms like fragile twigs, its little legs. I was afraid of hurting it, but even more afraid that if I was too gentle, I wouldn't warm it in time. "Wrap the baby in dry towels, as many layers as possible," the dispatcher said. "Keep the baby warm. Hold the baby against your body if you can." I did exactly that, pressing the baby to my chest, using what little warmth my aging body could offer. I bent my head down, pressed my cheek to its forehead, cold, but not as icy as at the lake. I listened for its breathing, counting each breath like counting the last seconds of time. It's breathing," I said, more to reassure myself than anyone else. "Very weak." "That's good," she replied. "Keep doing what you're doing. The ambulance will arrive in a few minutes." A few minutes. Just a few minutes. But to me, they stretched into a lifetime. I sat on the kitchen floor, my back against the cabinets, the baby cradled in my arms. I began to rock gently, instinctively, a slow rhythm I didn't realize I still remembered. I whispered sounds that weren't really words, just soft murmurs, as if I were speaking directly to my own heart. "Don't give up," I whispered, not sure who I was speaking to. "Please, don't give up." The ambulance siren sounded in the distance, faint at first, then growing louder. When I heard it, a surge of strength rushed through me. I stood, unsteady, walked to the door, and flung it open as if they could see me from the road. Red and blue lights flickered against the old pine trees, reflecting off the lake behind the house. 2 paramedics rushed in, one middle-aged man with graying hair and a younger woman with her hair pulled back neatly. They looked at me, then at the baby in my arms, and their expressions changed instantly. "Here," I said, my voice suddenly small. I found the baby in the lake." The woman gently took the baby from my arms. The way she held it made my chest ache and ease at the same time. Professional, firm, but never rough. The man opened his medical bag, pulling out equipment and a thermal blanket. "Severe hypothermia," he said after a quick check. "Signs of water aspiration." I stood there with empty arms, feeling as if the one thing keeping me upright had been taken away. I wanted to ask everything, whether the baby would live, whether they could save it. But my throat locked tight, no words coming out. "Would you like to come with us?" the man asked, looking straight at me. I nodded immediately. "Yes, I'm coming." They placed the baby on a small stretcher, wrapped it in a warming blanket, and fitted an oxygen mask. I followed them out, climbing into the ambulance with shaking legs. Inside, the lights were bright, the smell of antiseptic sharp. Machines hummed steadily, cold, clinical sounds, but strangely, they made me less afraid. Here, at least, there was order. There was process. There was hope. The ambulance started moving, the siren wailing through the early night. I sat on the side bench, my hands clasped tightly together, staring at the baby lying amid wires and machines. It looked smaller than ever, as if a strong gust of wind could carry it away. "What is your relation to the baby?" the woman asked, watching the monitor while adjusting the oxygen mask. I opened my mouth, then stopped. I didn't know how to answer. I didn't know what I was to this child. I'm the one who found the baby," I said finally. She nodded and didn't ask anything else. The ambulance sped through familiar roads leading into town. I looked out the window at closed shops and houses sunk into darkness. Other people's lives were continuing as usual, while mine had just turned onto a path I had never prepared for. When the ambulance stopped in front of the hospital, everything moved very fast. The rear doors opened, cold air rushed in. The baby was wheeled out and I followed, almost running. The emergency department doors swung open, harsh white lights making me squint. "NICU," someone said. "Prepare the NICU." I was held back in the hallway as they pushed the stretcher through the automatic doors. I tried to keep looking, tried to memorize every detail. The blanket, the tiny mask, the little hand, as if turning away would make the baby disappear. The doors closed in front of me. I stood there alone in the long, cold hallway, and for the first time since I heard that dull splash by the lake, I allowed myself to shake with fear. The NICU doors shut, leaving a hollow ache in my chest. I stood there for a long time, until a nurse passing by gently touched my shoulder and asked if I was okay. I nodded out of habit, though I wasn't sure what okay even meant anymore. My hands were still shaking. Not from the cold now, but from the feeling that I had been yanked out of a familiar reality and thrown into another world where I had no control over anything. I was led into a small waiting room next to the emergency department. Gray plastic chairs, white walls, the sharp smell of disinfectant seeping into every breath. I sat down, my hands clasped tightly together to keep them from trembling. In my mind, images of the baby kept appearing and fading, like a skipping film reel. Cold skin, weak breathing, the steady beeping of machines in the ambulance. I tried to cling to one concrete detail so I wouldn't drift into panic. Less than 10 minutes later, 2 people entered the room. One was a police officer in his 40s, his face serious but not cold. The other was a younger woman holding a thin folder. They introduced themselves and sat across from me. "Mrs. Whitcomb," the man said, his voice low and steady. "We need to take your statement about what happened tonight." I nodded. I had expected this. I knew the moment I called 911, my life would no longer be quiet. I just hadn't expected it to happen so fast while my hands were still shaking. I told them everything from the beginning. I didn't leave out a single detail I could remember. The sound from the lake, Lysan's car, the trunk wide open, the dark object on the water, the faint noise. I spoke slowly, carefully, as if talking too fast might make the story slip out of my grasp. "Are you certain it was Lysan's car?" the woman asked, her eyes never leaving her notebook. "Absolutely," I replied. "I've seen that car countless times. I couldn't mistake it." "Did you see the license plate clearly?" I shook my head. "No, the car was moving too fast, but I clearly saw the trunk was open." The man wrote something down, then looked up. "Did you see Lysan herself? Her face?" I hesitated for a second. "No, I only saw the car, but it was her car." The room fell silent for a few seconds. I felt a subtle shift in the air, not outright doubt, but a cautious step backward. The woman closed her notebook and studied me more closely. "Do you know where Lysan is right now?" "No," I said. I haven't spoken to her since my son's funeral." Hearing Nathaniel's name spoken aloud made my throat tighten. The man nodded, his expression softening slightly. "We understand this is a major shock," he said, "but we need to verify some details." He stood up and stepped out of the room. I didn't know where he went. I only knew that I suddenly felt abandoned on a chair that was too hard, in a room that was too bright. The woman stayed, watching me with an expression that wasn't unfriendly, but not fully trusting either. "Mrs. Whitcomb," she said more gently, "do you have any history of mental health issues? Depression, anxiety, anything like that?" The question stunned me. I knew they had to ask. I knew it was procedure. But hearing it still felt like someone touching a wound that hadn't healed yet. "I lost my son 7 months ago," I said slowly. "I was sad. I was in pain. But I'm not delusional. I don't imagine things that aren't real." She nodded and wrote something down. "Are you currently taking any medication?" "I took a mild sedative for a few weeks after the funeral," I answered honestly, "but I stopped a long time ago." She didn't say anything else, just nodded. But in her eyes I saw something that weighed heavily on my heart. Hesitation. Not cruelty, but the kind of caution people reserve for those who have suffered a great loss, whose memories might be colored by grief. The man returned, holding a tablet. He set it on the table and turned the screen toward me. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he said, "we've done a quick check of traffic camera data near your area." My stomach tightened. "Lysan's vehicle," he continued, "was recorded at a gas station about 20 minutes from your house, around the same time you said you saw it leaving the lake." I stared at the screen. A blurry image appeared. A gray SUV, the same model as Lysan's, parked by a gas pump. A timestamp was clearly visible below it. "That's impossible," I said, my voice higher than I wanted. "I saw it, I'm sure." "We're not saying you're lying," the man replied quickly. "We're saying there's a discrepancy we need to understand." Maybe the camera is wrong," I said, even though I could hear how weak my own words sounded. Or it wasn't exactly the same time. The woman tilted her head slightly. "Is it possible you're mistaken about the timing? That the incident happened earlier or later than you think?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. I remembered the afternoon light, the angle of the sun on the lake, the ticking clock in my kitchen. But memory isn't something you can weigh against digital data. I knew that. Maybe, I said at last, but I'm not mistaken about the suitcase. Silence again. I saw them exchange a glance. Without a word, I understood what it meant. In their minds, my story was slipping from the realm of certainty into the realm of caution. The man let out a quiet breath. Mrs. Whitcomb, we need you to understand that we have to consider every possibility, especially in a serious situation like this. What about the baby? I asked, my voice trembling. If you don't believe me, what will happen to the baby? My question hung in the air. The woman looked at me, her expression softening slightly. The baby is being cared for, she said. Our top priority is the baby's safety. But if you think I'm mistaken, I pressed, unable to stop myself, if you think I imagine this, then Lysanne won't be searched for, and if she really did this... I couldn't finish the sentence. I didn't dare. The man stood up, resting his hands on the table. We will continue investigating, he said, but you also need to rest. You've been through a very difficult night. Rest. The word felt absurd. When they left, I remained alone in the brightly lit room, feeling as though I had been removed from the center of my own story. I was no longer the woman who saved a baby. I was a witness, and worse, a witness they didn't fully trust. For the first time that night, I wondered if I truly could have been mistaken, if the light, the grief, the loss had played tricks on my memory. The thought sent a chill through me. If I was wrong, then who was I in this story? But then the image of the suitcase came back with brutal clarity, the weight pulling at my arms, the soaked leather, the faint sound from inside, the icy cold when I touched the baby. Those weren't dreams. They weren't distorted memories. I might be mistaken about many things, but not about the suitcase. I sat alone in the waiting room for nearly an hour after the police left. No one told me where to go or what to do next. I didn't ask. I just sat there, my back against the cold wall, my eyes fixed on the NICU doors, as if staring long enough might let me see through them and know how the baby was doing. An older nurse brought me a cup of water and set it on the small table beside me, gently telling me I should drink something. I thanked her, but I only held the cup without drinking. The water trembled with the uncontrollable shaking in my hands. Time moved painfully slowly, each minute stretching out. I heard medical shoes echoing in the hallway, automatic doors opening and closing, announcements calling patient names somewhere farther away. Everything continued as normal while inside me there was only a heavy emptiness. Finally, a doctor stepped out from the NICU area. He looked to be in his 50s, with graying hair and a calm, measured voice. He studied me for a moment before speaking, as if weighing each word. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he said, "the baby is a bit more stable now. We're keeping the baby warm and supporting breathing. The condition is still serious, but the baby is fighting." I nodded, unsure I could still speak. My throat was dry, but my heart beat faster with a fragile spark of hope. "We need to run some tests," he continued, "including a DNA test." I looked at him, not immediately understanding. "To do what?" "To identify relatives," he said. "In cases like this, we need to know who the baby belongs to, whether there are any biological family members. That's very important for care and future decisions." I fell silent. Part of me had expected this, but hearing it spoken aloud still felt like something quietly breaking inside me. I didn't know who this baby was. I didn't know where it came from. I only knew I had found it in a suitcase. "Are you willing to provide a sample?" the doctor asked calmly. I nodded. Yes, if needed. A nurse led me into a small room to take a cheek swab. The process was quick, almost mechanical. I sat there, watching the swab touch the inside of my mouth, wondering what I was stepping into. I didn't allow myself to think too far ahead. I just followed instructions, one step at a time, as if not thinking would make it easier. Then came more waiting. I left the hospital after it was fully dark, but I didn't go home. I couldn't. I returned to the waiting room and sat there for several more hours until another nurse gently told me I should go rest. They would call if anything changed. I stood up, my legs heavy as lead, and left the hospital feeling as if I were abandoning a piece of myself behind those doors. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room with the lights on, listening to the wind move through the trees outside. Images of Nathaniel filled my mind, his smile as a child, the way he called me Mom in his warm, steady voice as an adult. I searched the final months before his death for any sign I might have missed. Had he ever said anything about becoming a father? Had I ever noticed anything unusual about Lysanne? I couldn't remember, or maybe I hadn't wanted to remember. The next morning, the phone rang before it was fully light outside. I sat up instantly, my heart pounding. "Mrs. Whitcomb," the doctor's voice from the day before said, "Could you come to the hospital? We have the results." I didn't ask what the results were. I just said I would be there right away. I drove in a half-awake haze, the familiar road suddenly feeling strange. When I arrived, they led me into a small consultation room. The doctor was there, along with a woman I recognized as a hospital social worker, and a man in plain clothes I assumed was a police officer. The air in the room felt heavy. "Mrs. Whitcomb," the doctor said slowly, "the DNA results confirm that you have a direct biological relationship with the baby." I held my breath. "Specifically," he continued, "you are the baby's biological grandmother." I heard the words, but my mind couldn't process them right away. Biological grandmother. The two words hovered in the air, refusing to connect. I looked from one person to another, waiting for someone to say there had been a mistake. "That can't be," I whispered. "My son, Nathaniel, he's dead. He didn't have a child." The police officer lowered his head slightly, his voice turning more serious. "According to the results, the baby is Nathaniel's child." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. I gripped the edge of the chair to keep from falling. Images of the suitcase, the lake, the baby's bluish face overlapped with Nathaniel's face in my mind, forming a chaotic blur that made it hard to breathe. "I didn't know," I said, my voice trembling. "I never knew Lysanne was pregnant." The social worker nodded. "We only just learned that as well. Based on medical estimates, Lysanne was already pregnant before Nathaniel passed away." Before he died. The phrase pierced me like a blade. I tried to remember the few times I had seen Lysanne during that period. She always wore loose coats, her frame naturally slender. I had assumed it was simply her style. I hadn't asked. I hadn't looked closely. "She concealed the pregnancy," the police officer added. "So far, we haven't found any official prenatal care records." I shook my head, as if the motion could drive away the reality that had just been placed on my shoulders. "Why?" I asked, almost pleading. "Why didn't she tell anyone?" No one answered right away. The doctor cleared his throat and shifted to another topic, though his voice remained heavy. "There's one more thing," he said. "Based on the DNA results and the circumstances, we've shared the information with the police. They've decided to reopen the case regarding your son's death." I turned to the police officer. He nodded in confirmation. "Nathaniel's accident," he said, "was initially ruled as a loss of control on a wet road. But with the new information, we need to re-examine it." "Re-examine it how?" I asked, even as a nameless fear began taking shape inside me. "We've requested a new inspection of the vehicle," he said, "and there are indications that the braking system may have been tampered with." I heard myself inhale deeply, then realized I couldn't breathe out right away. The brakes, tampered with. The words drilled into my head, warping every memory of the night Nathaniel died. "You mean—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "We can't draw conclusions yet," the officer said carefully, "but there is a possibility that it wasn't a simple accident." I closed my eyes. I saw Nathaniel driving in the rain as clearly as if it were happening again. He had called me a few hours before the crash just to ask if I was doing okay. I had told him I was fine. I hadn't known that would be the last time I ever heard his voice. "And Lysanne?" I asked, opening my eyes. "Where is she?" The officer shook his head. "We haven't been able to determine her current location." The room fell silent again. It felt as if the world had collapsed, revealing a deeper, darker layer beneath it, one I had never imagined. My son was dead. I had buried him. I had learned how to live with that pain. And now they were telling me he had a child, that his death might not have been an accident, that the woman I once called my daughter-in-law had hidden everything. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, but beneath the fear I sensed something else forming, a hard, cold resolve. "The baby," I said slowly. "My grandchild is still alive, right?" The doctor nodded. "Yes, and we're doing everything we can." I nodded too. In my mind, a truth no one wanted to face was coming into focus. That baby was not an accident. It was the final link in a chain of events I was only just beginning to see. And if my son truly died because someone wanted him dead, then that baby had never been safe from the very beginning. I left the hospital in the late afternoon, my head heavy as if stuffed with stones. What I had just learned didn't allow me to collapse, but it didn't allow me to stand still either. Something had been hidden for far too long, and now it was beginning to surface, piece by piece, cold and sharp. 2 days later, I received a call from the county sheriff. He said they needed to meet with me to discuss some new findings related to Nathaniel. His tone wasn't urgent, but it was heavy enough to tell me this was no small matter. I drove to the police station on a gray morning, the Oregon sky low and pressing down, as if it were bearing weight on my shoulders as well. They led me into a small conference room. A thick folder was already sitting on the table. I recognized my son's name printed on the cover immediately. Seeing that name in bold letters on paper, not on a gravestone or a death certificate, tightened my chest in a different way. A young investigator spoke first. He said they had begun reviewing Nathaniel's financial records from the 6 months before his death. At first, it was standard procedure, but the numbers didn't sit as quietly as they had expected. "Your son had a fairly large life insurance policy," he said, sliding a copy toward me. I looked down. The figure stood out clearly, cold and impersonal, much larger than anything I had ever thought Nathaniel needed. I remembered casually asking him about insurance once over dinner. He had said it was just in case. I hadn't asked more. "The original beneficiary," the investigator continued, "was his wife." I swallowed. Lysanne. "But—" He paused, flipping to another page. There was a change. I looked up at him, then at the older investigator sitting across from me. The older man nodded. "About 3 weeks before his death," he said, "Nathaniel updated the policy." I bent back down to read. The legal language blurred before my eyes, but one line stood out clearly. The beneficiary was changed to the insured's biological child, or any child born in the future. It felt as if an invisible hand tightened around my chest. Biological child. Future child. He knew. Nathaniel had known. His will was also amended, the younger investigator said, his voice slower now as if trying not to break me. All assets, the house, savings, investment funds, were placed into a trust for the child if the child were born. I placed my hand on the table to steady myself. In my mind, Nathaniel no longer appeared as the son who always smiled when he came home to visit, but as a man who saw danger approaching and chose to stand in front of it. "That means," I said quietly, almost to myself, "it means," the older investigator finished, "that if the baby lives, Lysanne receives nothing from the will or the insurance, not a single dollar." The room went silent. No one needed to say anything else. Every piece fell into place without force. Nathaniel dies, Lysanne collects the insurance money. The baby dies, the trust becomes meaningless, 2 deaths, 1 stream of money. I closed my eyes. A wave of nausea rose, not from the grief of losing my son, a grief I had carried for 7 months, but from the cold clarity of the motive now exposed. I had believed my family's tragedy was fate, a slick curve on a rainy night. Now it had the shape of numbers and signatures. "We believe the motive is fairly clear," the investigator said, "at least financially." I opened my eyes. "And the baby?" I asked. "What about the baby?" He met my gaze without looking away. "If the baby doesn't survive, Lysanne could attempt to challenge the will. There are multiple legal scenarios." I let out a hollow laugh, the sound unfamiliar even to me. So, the baby was the final obstacle. No one contradicted me. I left the police station feeling as though I had walked through a storm without warning. Everything I thought I knew about Nathaniel's marriage, about Lysanne, about the final months of my son's life, everything had been turned upside down. That evening, I sat alone in the living room, yellow lamplight falling over the family photos on the wall. There was one picture of Nathaniel and Lysanne on their wedding day. They stood side by side, smiling brightly. I used to look at that photo and think my son had finally found a partner. Now I looked at it as silent evidence of my own innocence. I remembered my last conversations with Nathaniel. He had seemed more tired, smiled less. Once, when I asked if he was okay, he had simply said, "I'm worried about the future." I had assumed it was work stress, family responsibility. I hadn't understood that he was talking about a life not yet born. I stood and walked into Nathaniel's old bedroom, the room I had kept exactly as it was from the day he left home. I opened his desk drawer. Inside were old papers, notebooks, a few bills. I didn't know what I was looking for, only that I needed to touch the things he had touched, as if doing so might bring me closer to him. In an old envelope, I found a copy of the will. I had seen it at the police station, but holding it now felt different. On the final page, next to Nathaniel's signature, there was a small handwritten line, "For my child. So my child will be safe." My tears fell onto the paper, blurring the ink. I slid down to the floor, my back against the bed, and for the first time in days, I allowed myself to cry out loud. Not just because Nathaniel was dead, but because he had died while trying to protect his child. The thought was both devastating and suffocating, but it also lit a fire inside me I hadn't known was still there. My son had chosen that path. He had placed his child above his own life and safety, and now that child was still alive, fragile, but alive. I wiped my tears and stood up. I looked around the room at Nathaniel's belongings, and in that moment, something became clearer than ever. If Lysanne had been willing to kill her husband for money and willing to throw her own child into a lake to remove the final obstacle, then I couldn't pretend things would simply resolve on their own. No miracle appears unless someone steps forward to protect what matters. My son had done his part. Now it was my turn. I wasn't an investigator. I wasn't a lawyer. I was just a mother, and now a grandmother. But I knew one thing for certain. That baby existed because Nathaniel paid for it with his life, and I would not allow that death to be meaningless. That night, I returned to the hospital. I stood behind the NICU glass, looking at the baby lying there, tiny among tubes and machines. Its chest rose and fell weakly but steadily. I placed my hand against the glass and whispered, even though I knew the baby couldn't hear me. "Your father did everything for you," I said, "and your grandmother will too." Under the cold white lights of the intensive care unit, I understood that the truth had surfaced not to punish me, but to prepare me for what lay ahead. Because if the motive was this clear, then the real battle was only just beginning. They didn't say it outright. No one walked into the room and bluntly declared that Evan, the baby I had just learned was my grandson, didn't belong to me. That truth came slowly, layer by layer through carefully chosen words, evasive nods, and forms placed on the table in voices so polite they felt cold. 3 days after the DNA results were confirmed, a representative from the Oregon Department of Child and Family Services came to the hospital to meet me. She was young, neatly dressed, her voice soft. She spoke at length about procedure, about the child's best interests, about evaluations for the future. I listened and nodded, but in my mind one question repeated over and over: where will Evan be? For now, she said, placing her hand on the folder, the baby is under temporary state custody. The words were light, almost gentle, but they slammed into my chest like a door being shut. Under state custody. Not mine, not family, a system. I'm his grandmother, I said, my voice low but firm. You know that? Yes, she replied. We've documented that, but it doesn't automatically grant guardianship. I wanted to ask why, but I had lived long enough to know the answer wouldn't fit into a single word. It lived in decades of policy, in checklists written by people who had never stood in front of NICU glass, watching a tiny life struggle to breathe. They handed me a list of requirements if I wanted to be considered for temporary guardianship. It was longer than I expected. A full medical evaluation, a criminal background check, a psychological assessment, a home study, in-depth interviews, and finally, a review meeting where I would have no authority, only the right to wait. Can I see Evan? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. The young woman hesitated. At this time, visits must be approved individually. The baby is still in a sensitive recovery phase. I understood what that meant. Not yet, or maybe not at all, or whenever it was convenient. That day, I left the hospital without seeing Evan. For the first time since pulling the suitcase from the lake, I truly felt powerless. Not because I was weak, but because suddenly nothing depended on my will anymore. The weeks that followed blurred into a long stretch of paperwork and waiting rooms. I went from the hospital to government offices, from clinics to evaluation centers. I answered questions I never imagined being asked at this stage of my life. Do you have a history of depression? I lost my son, I answered. Who wouldn't grieve in that situation? They wrote it down, nodded, checked a box. Do you have long-term support? I have friends, I have neighbors. They pressed further. Who? Where? Could they commit? During the psychological evaluation, the woman sitting across from me was younger than Nathaniel had been on the day he graduated. She asked how I felt when I saw Evan. I told the truth, that I felt afraid and grateful at the same time, hurt and purposeful at once. She asked whether I thought I was trying to compensate for the loss of my son by holding on to the baby. I stayed silent for a long time before answering. I'm not compensating, I said. I'm continuing. She wrote it down. No reaction. The preliminary results came faster than I expected and colder than I had hoped. I was assessed as not ideal for long-term caregiving. Age, potential decline in health in the future, psychological records noting a period of profound grief after my son's death, no younger co-guardian within the immediate family, not ideal. The phrase clung to me like a label I couldn't peel off. I had raised a child to adulthood. I had worked my entire life. I had survived difficult years without anyone holding my hand, but in front of a checklist, I became a risk. They said Evan would be placed with a temporary foster family once he was stable enough to leave the NICU, a family that was certified, experienced, more suitable in the long term. And what about me? I asked. What am I in all of this? The answer came after an uncomfortable pause. You are a biological relative, they said, and you may apply for supervised visitation. Visitation. Supervised. As if I were a potential threat. I didn't cry in front of them. I saved my tears for the long nights at home when the kitchen was silent and the chair Nathaniel used to sit in was still empty. I sat there thinking about Evan, about the weak rise and fall of his chest, about the tiny hand that had once curled around my finger through a sterile glove. I wondered whether a system could understand that feeling, whether there was a box on any form where love could be recorded. I fought, not by shouting or pounding the table. I fought with the persistence only people who have lived long enough possess. I made phone calls, I wrote letters, I showed up on time for every appointment. I carried every document they requested, neatly organized in an old briefcase. Eventually, they allowed me to see Evan twice a week, 30 minutes each. Time. Under the supervision of a social worker. I received the notice in a short, emotionless email. When I finished reading it, I had to sit down because my legs suddenly felt weak. The first visit took place in a small room near the NICU. Evan had been moved to a portable incubator, fewer wires attached, his skin more pink. When they placed him in my arms, carefully guiding every movement, I felt something inside me click into place. He was so light that I was afraid even breathing too hard would make him tremble. I looked at that tiny face, trying to memorize every feature. Evan didn't know who I was. He didn't know about Nathaniel. He didn't know about the lake, the suitcase, or the numbers written into a will. But he knew warmth. He knew a heartbeat. When I rocked him gently, he grew quieter, as if that small body recognized something familiar that his mind couldn't yet name. 30 minutes passed with brutal speed. When the social worker told me my time was up, I didn't argue. I only leaned down and whispered a sentence meant for my ears alone. "I'm here," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." The visits became the only axis my life revolved around. I measured time by the distance between moments when I was allowed to see Evan. Everything else, paperwork, evaluations, meetings, was just noise. Evan was the only reason I stayed upright, the reason I got out of bed every morning, the reason I didn't let myself slide into darkness. There were days I went home and wondered whether I was fighting the inevitable, whether the system would crush me without mercy, whether one day they would say it was enough and Evan would disappear from my reach forever. But every time that thought surfaced, I remembered Nathaniel, the handwritten line in the will, the truth that my son had not stepped back when he knew he could lose everything. If he hadn't given up, neither would I. I didn't know whether I would win or lose. I only knew that giving up wasn't an option. Not while Evan was still there, still breathing, still gripping my finger with a weak but determined strength. Not when I was the only person in the world who could see the entire story, from the quiet lake to the lifeless conference rooms. On paper, that child might belong to no one. But in my heart, Evan already had a place no official stamp could erase. I was washing my only coffee mug in the sink when my phone vibrated on the kitchen table. The sound was too loud in the quiet house, making me flinch. I wiped my hands on a towel, glanced at the screen once, then turned away. An unknown number. I had learned not to answer calls like that since the day Nathaniel died. Wrong numbers, sales voices, strangers who didn't know how small my world had become. I let the phone vibrate 2 more times, then silenced it. But just as I turned my back, a chill ran straight down my spine. Not a vague intuition, something specific, familiar, as if someone had just touched the house from the outside. I turned back and picked up the phone. The screen lit up again, same number. I answered before I could think any further. "Mrs. Alara," the voice said slowly, low and calm in a way that made my skin crawl. "You finally answered." I didn't need to ask who it was. That voice, even after 7 months, carried the same artificial rhythm I had recognized the very first time we met. "Lysanne," I said. Not loud, not shaking. I surprised myself. There was a soft exhale on the other end, like a soundless smile. "I knew you'd recognize me." My heart pounded, but my mind felt strangely cold. I leaned against the kitchen counter, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Why are you calling?" I asked. To talk, she replied. About Evan. The name made my stomach tighten. Evan. She said it as if she had the right. You have nothing to say to me, I said, and nothing to do with him. A quiet laugh followed. Don't pretend to be righteous with me, Alara. I know Evan is alive. The sentence dropped like a stone. Even though I had prepared myself for this possibility, hearing it spoken still knocked my breath off rhythm. You don't know anything, I said, even knowing how weak it sounded. I know enough, Lysanne said. I know you pulled him out of the lake. I know the hospital ran tests. I know you're his grandmother. Did you really think that could stay hidden forever? I closed my eyes briefly. That meant she had been watching, or someone had told her, or worse, she had never gone as far away as I thought. What do you want? I asked bluntly. Her voice lowered, slower now, as if she were explaining something perfectly reasonable. I want what belongs to me. Evan doesn't belong to you, I said, and this time my voice didn't stay calm. You threw him into the lake. That was an accident, Lysanne said immediately, without hesitation. I panicked. I had just given birth. I wasn't in control. I let out a dry laugh. You think I believe that? You don't have to believe it, she replied. You just have to understand that I'm his mother. The law is more on my side than you think. I didn't answer. I walked slowly toward the small desk in the living room where I kept Nathaniel's old voice recorder, a strange habit, holding onto my son's things as if he were still somewhere in the house. I pressed record and set the phone on speaker. Go on, I said. What do you want? Money, Lysanne said without circling it, and Evan. The bluntness almost made me feel relieved. No pretending, no hiding. How much? I asked. Not how much, she corrected. Everything, the insurance, the trust, what Nathaniel left for the baby. I swallowed hard. And if I refuse? Then I'll show up, Lysanne said calmly, like she was talking about the weather. I'll see a lawyer. I'll tell a different story. That you panicked, that you made things up, that you stole my child. Who do you think will believe you? I asked. People tend to believe the younger one, she replied. More stable, less loss. A cold anger rose inside me. Not explosive, but the kind that comes from living long enough to understand the cruelty behind words like that. You will never touch Evan again, I said slowly. I swear it. Lysanne laughed. Don't make promises you don't have the power to keep. I'm giving you two options. Either you hand Evan over to me along with access to the assets, or I make this very ugly. I'm recording this call, I said, not sure why I said it out loud. There was a pause of a few seconds. I could hear her breathing through the speaker. You think that scares me? Lysanne said. I've survived worse. The call ended abruptly. No goodbye, no further threat, just an empty silence, as if someone had cut a wire. I stood there for a long time after the screen went dark. My hands were shaking, but I didn't sit down. I knew if I did, I wouldn't be able to stand up again right away. I called the county sheriff before I could second-guess myself. When I finished telling him everything, there was a long silence on the other end. You did the right thing by recording it, he said. This is very important. They came to my house within 40 minutes. 2 men and a woman, all in plain clothes. They listened to the recording twice. No one spoke while it played. She made a mistake, the female officer said finally. She contacted you directly. What do you want me to do? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. The sheriff looked at me, his expression heavy. We want you to cooperate. How? By continuing to talk to her, he said. Let her believe you're considering it. I looked at him without blinking. You want me to be bait? He didn't deny it. We'll be close. We'll protect you. I thought about Evan, about the small room where I was allowed to hold him twice a week, about the possibility that one wrong step could cost me him forever. She's dangerous, I said. You know that. We do, he replied, but this may be our best chance to catch her. I stayed silent for a long time. In my mind, I saw Nathaniel's face, not at the end, but when he was alive, the rare, serious look he had when he had made up his mind. "If I refuse," I asked, "then what?" "We continue investigating," he said, "but she may disappear." I closed my eyes. When I opened them, I had my answer. "I'll do it," I said. The female officer started to object, but the sheriff raised his hand to stop her. He looked at me the way you look at someone who has chosen the harder path. "You understand the danger?" he asked. "I do," I said. "But I also understand that if I don't step forward, Evan will never be safe." They left after dark. The house returned to its familiar silence, but this time it carried a different weight. I sat down in the chair and stared into the empty space in front of me. There are calls you shouldn't answer, and there are calls that, once answered, will never let you return to your old life. From that moment on, I knew I had stepped into a game whose rules I didn't get to set. But if being bait was the only way to end this, for Evan, then I was willing. The meeting was set for a moonless night. The police said it wasn't random. People like Lysanne prefer darkness, the sense of control that comes when others can't see clearly. I nodded and didn't ask more. I had agreed to step into this. There was no room for half measures. She chose an abandoned warehouse by the old lake, less than a 10-minute drive from my house. I knew the place. When Nathaniel was little, he used to take me there, proudly calling it his secret fortress. Later, the building was abandoned. Broken windows, rusted metal roof. No one ever went there anymore. I never imagined I'd return under circumstances like this. The police prepared everything carefully. They checked my car, clipped a small recording device beneath my collar, went over every detail with me. Move slowly, speak little, let Lysanne talk. I listened and memorized it all, but strategy wasn't what filled my mind. All I could see was Evan lying in the incubator, his tiny hand curling each time cold air touched it. I told myself I couldn't afford to make a single mistake. I arrived 10 minutes early. The warehouse loomed beside the lake, dark and silent like a solid block of shadow. A light wind rippled the surface of the water. I parked the car and sat still for a few seconds to breathe. My hands rested on the steering wheel, feeling my heartbeat steady and even. I didn't want Lysanne to see that I was afraid. Another set of headlights appeared at the bend in the road. The car stopped a few yards from mine. The door opened, and Lysanne stepped out. For a split second, I almost didn't recognize her. Her hair was shorter, dyed dark, her face thinner, sharper. She wore an oversized jacket and a baseball cap pulled low, but her walk hadn't changed. Still that slightly overconfident stride, as if the world owed her something. "You're early," Lysanne said calmly. "I don't like waiting," I replied. She gave a faint smile, her eyes flicking quickly around the lakeshore. "You've always been straightforward. Nathaniel was too. That was both of your weakness." I clenched my jaw and said nothing. I stepped out of the car and faced her, keeping the distance the police had instructed. The warehouse behind Lysanne was pitch black, its door slightly ajar. "Where's the money?" she asked bluntly. "I want to hear you say it all," I replied. "Everything." She raised an eyebrow. "You still think you get to set conditions?" "I do," I said. "Because if I didn't, you wouldn't have called me." A brief silence followed. Then she laughed. "Fine. I suppose you deserve to know." She leaned back against the metal door of the warehouse, arms crossed, her voice slow and measured, like she was reciting a story she had rehearsed many times. "Nathaniel didn't understand," she began. "He always thought everything could be solved by talking. Family, responsibility, children." She curled her lip. "I never wanted that life." "Then why marry him?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Because he was stable," Lysanne replied without hesitation. "Because of the money. Because it meant an easy life. I thought I could tolerate it for a few years, and then everything would be fine." "Until you got pregnant." Her eyes darkened for a moment. "Yes, until I got pregnant." I never planned that. But Nathaniel did, I said. He changed his will. Lisanne laughed again, this time unable to hide the bitterness. Exactly. And that's when I realized I was about to lose everything. She continued, each word clear and unbroken. Nathaniel discovered the pregnancy, wanted to keep the baby, wanted to be a father, wanted to do the right thing. He talked about the future, about responsibility, about making sure the money stayed with the child. With every sentence, Lisanne felt another door closing in front of her. I couldn't let that happen, she said coldly. I couldn't let a child trap my life. I couldn't let you kill my son, I said, my voice shaking. Lisanne looked straight at me. I didn't kill him in a moment of anger. I didn't lose control. I planned it. I heard my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The brakes, she went on, a small adjustment, a believable accident. Everything would end cleanly. And Evan? I asked, my throat burning. She exhaled as if speaking about an inconvenience. That was the final step. Without it, things would get complicated. I thought, if he didn't exist, everything would go back to the way it was supposed to be. You call that a solution? I asked, unable to hold back any longer. Yes, Lisanne replied without hesitation. A solution. My entire body went cold, but my hand stayed tight around the small panic button hidden in my palm. I remembered the police's words. Wait a little longer. And now? I asked. What do you plan to do now? Now I want to finish this, Lisanne said. You hand Evan over to me. You hand over the money. I disappear. You get to live out the rest of your grief-stricken but peaceful life. I won't do that, I said. Her eyes darkened. I gave you a chance. In a movement so fast I barely registered it, Lisanne pulled a gun from inside her jacket. The metal flashed under the car lights, cold and terrifyingly real. I didn't want to do this, she said, her voice perfectly steady. But I don't have a choice anymore. I didn't step back. I looked straight at her, and in that moment I no longer saw my former daughter-in-law. I saw a stranger who had chosen this path a long time ago. Evan will never belong to you, I said. My finger pressed hard on the panic button. 3 times, just like they had told me. The sound that filled my ears wasn't a siren, but a sharp explosion that tore through the air. The gunshot echoed off the warehouse walls and dissolved into the surface of the lake, leaving a suffocating silence behind it. I felt a powerful force shove me backward. Everything slowed down for a brief heartbeat. I didn't know where the bullet went. I only knew that in that moment, the line between life and death was so thin I could feel it against my skin. Then from the darkness around the warehouse, red and blue lights erupted and shouted commands shattered the night. I didn't fall right away. I remember that instant clearly, like a photograph frozen inside my chaotic mind. The shot had just gone off. My ears were ringing. The air felt torn apart. I staggered 1 step, my back hitting the car door, and only then did the pain crash over me, hot, deep, and unmistakably real, spreading from my left shoulder down my arm. I lifted my hand on instinct. Blood. Dark red. Not as much as I had expected, but enough to make my head spin. Then the red and blue lights flared again, ripping through the darkness. Shouting, running footsteps, the clatter of metal. I heard someone yell, "Police, drop the weapon now!" Lisanne turned around. In that brief moment, I saw her face clearly under the lights. No calm left, no confidence. Only fury mixed with panic. Her hand still held the gun, but it hesitated. "Drop it!" another voice shouted, sharper, more final. Lisanne looked around like a trapped animal. Then very slowly she let go. The gun hit the concrete with a dry clatter. Immediately, 2 officers rushed forward, slamming her to the ground and cuffing her hands behind her back. She started screaming, not in desperation, but in curses and threats, as if she still believed she could control the situation. No one responded. I slid down to the ground. My head was spinning, but I stayed conscious. A female officer knelt in front of me, placing a hand on my shoulder, carefully, avoiding the wound. "You've been shot," she said, "but you're okay. The bullet grazed soft tissue. It didn't hit bone." I nodded, not sure I fully understood. My eyes stayed fixed on Lysanne as she was dragged away. She twisted her head back to look at me, her gaze raw with hatred, completely unmasked. "I'll come back," she screamed. "You can't keep him forever." The police car door slammed shut. The sound was final, like a period at the end of a long, dark chapter. I was taken into an ambulance. The light inside was cold and white, the machines humming steadily. The paramedic kept talking to me, asking my name, the date, whether I felt dizzy. I answered slowly but clearly. There was only one thought in my mind. Where is Evan? "When can I see my grandson?" I asked. "You need stitches first," he replied, "but the baby is safe. We've confirmed it." I closed my eyes. For the first time in weeks, my chest loosened just a little. My injury wasn't serious. The bullet had gone off course, leaving a long but shallow tear. The doctor said I was lucky. I didn't feel lucky the way they meant it. I just felt alive. The days that followed moved faster than I expected. There was too much to do, too many people to talk to. I met with investigators, prosecutors, lawyers. I listened to the recording again, watched the footage from the officers' body cameras. I signed endless statements. The evidence was too clear to deny. The confession at the warehouse, the recorded phone call, proof of brake tampering, the insurance money trail, the hidden pregnancy. All of it lined up into a cold, logical chain, leaving no room for doubt. The trial came sooner than I ever imagined. There was no television-style drama, no long theatrical arguments. Everything moved like a well-oiled machine, just waiting for someone to press the button. I sat in the back row, my shoulders still wrapped in white bandages. Lysanne sat at the front, dressed in a gray inmate uniform. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at anyone. Her face was empty, as if every emotion had long since been burned away. When the prosecutor read the charges, first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, attempted infanticide, I felt each word land heavily in the room. Not because I was shocked, but because what I had known in my bones was finally being spoken out loud, publicly, beyond denial. The sentence was handed down on a rainy afternoon. Life imprisonment, no parole, no possibility of reduction. Lysanne didn't cry. She didn't scream. She only gripped the edge of the bench, as if trying to hold on to something already lost forever. I left the courthouse in silence. There was no sense of victory, only a quiet emptiness, like when the storm finally passes, leaving the ground soaked and the sky pale gray. Justice had arrived, but it didn't bring the relief people always promise. Evan was moved to a secure care unit shortly after the arrest. When I visited, he was stronger. His skin was pink, his cry powerful. When the nurse placed him in my arms, I felt the true weight of a life growing, no longer as fragile as the day I pulled the suitcase from the lake. "You're safe now," I whispered, pressing my forehead to his. "No one will hurt you anymore." A few weeks later, I received the temporary ruling from family court. I was recognized as Evan's legal guardian while long-term arrangements were reviewed. The document wasn't long, the language dry, but when I held it in my hands, I had to sit down. I thought of all the times they had said I wasn't ideal, all the forms, the judging looks. And in the end, it was the truth, harsh and painful, that had opened this path. Evan slept in the crib beside me as I read the ruling for the third time. His breathing was deep and steady. I looked at him, and for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that the future wasn't completely dark. Justice came late. It didn't save Nathaniel, it didn't erase the months of fear, but it came soon enough to keep Evan in this world. And for me, that was everything I could have ever asked for. I brought Evan home on a cloudy morning, the Oregon sky low and gentle, as if deliberately slowing its pace with mine. My small car carried one more life now, and even though everything had been prepared carefully, I still felt like I was doing something both familiar and entirely new. The car seat in the back had been installed by a young social worker who patiently walked me through every step, as if afraid I might forget how to do something basic. I thanked her and smiled, but inside I knew no set of instructions truly prepares you for this moment. When the tires rolled onto the familiar driveway in front of my house, I turned off the engine and sat still for a few seconds. The house stood there, the same old home with its weathered wooden porch, the north window Nathaniel had repaired during the summer he turned 35. I opened the back door of the car and leaned down to look at Evan. He was asleep, his tiny hands curled, his breathing even. I lifted him out, feeling the true weight of responsibility settle into my arms. As I stepped over the threshold, I realized the house had been silent for far too long, the kind of silence left behind by a place once full of voices, then suddenly stripped of its rhythm. I placed Evan in the new crib by the living room window where the morning light filtered in softly. I stood there watching him, and suddenly the room felt like it had gained another breath. Old age and a newborn are not a gentle combination. I understood that on the very first night. Evan woke at 1 a.m., then 3 a.m., then 5 a.m. I fumbled with the bottle, counting each scoop of formula like I was solving a difficult equation. My back ached. My knees crackled when I bent down to lift him. There were moments when I stood in the kitchen, my hands shaking, wondering if I was pushing myself too far. There were moments of suffocating fear. I laid Evan down in his crib and stared at his chest, waiting for the rise and fall. I checked the room temperature, checked the locks, checked everything so many times that even I could feel myself wearing down. Every small sound outside the porch made me flinch. Every night I slept half awake, ready to spring up at the first sound of his cry. But alongside the exhaustion were moments of healing I never expected. Evan has a small habit. When held close against my chest, he lets out a very soft breath, like a tiny sigh of relief. The first time I heard that sound, I stood completely still for minutes, afraid to move. I realized then that it wasn't only me holding him. He was holding on to me too, in the only way a baby knows how. In the mornings, when sunlight touches the curtains, Evan opens his eyes and looks around with a seriousness that's almost funny. Once he looked at me for a long moment, then slightly curved his lips. Not quite a smile, just the faintest change. But my heart tightened. Nathaniel had that same look when he was little, the look of someone weighing the world before deciding to accept it. There are details that hurt so much I have to turn away. The way Evan wrinkles his nose when he's displeased, the way he grips my finger with surprising strength, even a small mark on his chin, a trace so much like Nathaniel when he turned 2. I don't try to find my son in Evan, but Evan brings those things with him, like an unavoidable reminder. The house slowly came back to life in very tangible ways. The sound of the bottle sterilizer replaced the long silence. The living room light turns on at midnight, no longer to illuminate loneliness, but to make sure a small life is safe. I started opening the windows more often, letting fresh air flow in. I hung the family photo back on the wall, not to cling to the past, but to put it where it belongs. I learned to ask for help. A neighbor brought over a pot of hot soup on my 3rd day home. An old friend came to watch Evan so I could sleep for an hour. I used to think asking for help meant admitting weakness. Now I understand it's the only way to keep going. Some nights I sit in the armchair, Evan asleep on my chest, and I feel something very strange. Imperfect peace. I still think of Nathaniel every day. The pain hasn't disappeared. It's only shifted, making room for a new purpose. I no longer wake up just to get through the day. I wake up because Evan needs me. One afternoon, while I was changing Evan's diaper, he suddenly laughed. A short, high, clumsy sound. I froze, then laughed too, tears spilling without warning. I thought of Nathaniel, of my son's first laughs, and for the first time, that memory didn't bring only pain. It carried continuation. I am no longer alone in the way I once thought was permanent. Loneliness doesn't disappear entirely. It changes shape. It becomes the quiet after Evan falls asleep. It becomes the time I sit by the window, looking at the still lake in the distance, no longer trembling like before. I learn to live with it, without letting it swallow me. Sometimes, when I'm so tired I want to sit on the kitchen floor and cry, I wonder if I made the right choice. Then Evan wakes up, needing me, and the question fades. Not because I have a perfect answer, but because I have something to do. I began making very small plans, a regular medical schedule, a foster parent support class the social worker recommended, a small corner of the garden to plant flowers in the spring. These plans aren't promises for a distant future. They're stakes driven into the present, keeping me upright. This house has witnessed too much loss, but now it also witnesses a beginning. Not loud, not dramatic, just day by day, night by night, the steady breathing of a child growing up safe. When I hold Evan by the window on a quiet evening, I whisper to him, not expecting him to understand. "You have a home," I say, not because everything is okay, but because we will make it okay. The house is no longer a place where I live alone with memories. It becomes the place where I learn to keep living, without denying the pain, but without letting the pain define the rest of my life. And in Evan's steady breathing, I find the sense of purpose I thought I had lost with my son. No longer alone, not because loneliness vanished, but because, at last, I have someone to walk with, even though the road ahead is still long. Time doesn't arrive like a great wave that washes everything away. It comes slowly, day by day, quiet and patient, like water soaking into dry earth. Evan grew that way, not suddenly, not loudly, but steadily, so much so that sometimes I only noticed when a shirt had grown too tight, when the once fragile cries turned into curious babbling sounds. Evan is healthy. That is the first thing, and also the most important. The doctors said his lungs have fully recovered, with no lasting effects from those early days between life and death. Every time I hear that, I nod and say thank you, but inside I whisper a different thanks. A thank you meant for Nathaniel. My son never lived to see this, but I believe he traded his life so Evan could have that chance. Our mornings start early. Evan wakes when the first light slips through the curtains. No alarm needed. I learn to shape my rhythm around his. Meals, naps, small playtimes on the old rug in the living room. I thought I had forgotten all of this after Nathaniel grew up, but it turns out the body and the heart have their own memory. My hands know how to support his head. My voice naturally lowers when I rock him to sleep. I am mothering again, not to replace the past, but to carry it forward. When Evan began to say his first words, I knew I would have to face a question I had postponed for a long time. He asked it naturally, one quiet afternoon, as we sat together on the porch, watching leaves fall. "Where's Dad?" Evan asked, his voice small but clear. I took a slow breath. I had prepared for this moment, but no preparation is ever enough. I didn't want to lie. I also didn't want to place a burden on a child. "Your dad was a very good man," I said. "He loved you, even though he never got to meet you." Evan tilted his head, thinking, "Where is Dad?" "He's in our hearts," I answered, placing my hand on my chest, then on his. "And in the good things he left behind." I tell Evan about Nathaniel in small pieces, appropriate to his childhood. I tell him about a man who liked fixing things around the house, who liked laughing when he solved a difficult problem, who liked sitting by the lake fishing on quiet afternoons. I don't tell him about the warehouse, the gun, the cold water. Those truths will come later, when Evan is old enough to understand without being crushed by them. The past is still there. There are days when I open a drawer and find something of Nathaniel's, his old watch, a note he wrote, and the sharp pain returns, as vivid as the first day, but it no longer controls me. I don't let it decide how I live that day. I learn to place the pain in its own space, to respect it, without letting it steer my life. I am stronger, not in a loud way. My strength comes from getting up every morning, even when my back aches, from signing another stack of legal papers, even when my hand is tired, from facing the curious looks of strangers without needing to explain everything. I no longer feel the need to prove anything. I know I'm doing what's right. Some evenings, when Evan is fast asleep, I sit alone in the living room, the warm yellow light falling on the photos on the wall. Nathaniel on his graduation day, Nathaniel on his wedding day, and now Evan in oversized pajamas, smiling at the world. I look at those 3 images and see an unbroken current. My son is no longer here in flesh and bone, but his love remains, clearer and more tangible than ever. Evan is proof of that. Every time he laughs, every time he falls and stands back up, I see Nathaniel there, not as a ghost of loss, but as part of a life that continues. I don't have to imagine it. I only have to look. Someone once asked me, during one of those rare conversations, if I had any regrets. Regret for not turning away when I heard the sound by the lake. Regret for stepping into a dangerous chain of events. Regret for choosing the hardest path. I answered immediately without thinking. No, I don't regret it. Not because everything ended perfectly, because it didn't and never will. I don't regret it because if I could return to that moment, I would still run down to the lake. I would still pull the suitcase out. I would still choose Evan, no matter the cost. Time does not erase blood ties. It doesn't make me forget Nathaniel, and I don't want to forget him. It only teaches me how to carry that memory without collapsing under it. It teaches me that love doesn't end when someone is gone. It changes shape, finding another way to exist. When I hold Evan by the lake on a peaceful morning, the water calm as if it never witnessed tragedy, I whisper something only I can hear. "Your dad brought you here," I say, "and I'll stay for as long as I can." Evan doesn't understand everything. He only grips my hand tightly as children do. But in that grip, I feel a bond time cannot erase, a thread woven from blood, from choice, from unconditional love. I lost my son, but I did not lose my ability to love. And as long as Evan grows up, in those arms, I know I am living, not in the past, but in its meaningful continuation. I still remember that moment clearly, even though enough time has passed for everything around it to change. The lake that day was not violent at all. It was still, almost gentle, reflecting the pale gray sky of what seemed like an ordinary afternoon. If someone had looked from a distance, they would have seen nothing but calm water, a few small ripples, and wind moving through the trees. But I know that just one step more, and I could have turned away. If I had chosen to stay in the kitchen, pretending I heard nothing, if I had convinced myself it was just a harmless sound, not worth an older woman like me taking a risk. If I had chosen familiar safety over a vague instinct, just one different choice, and everything would have gone down a path with no return. If I had turned away, Evan would be gone. There would have been no suitcase pulled from the water, no faint breathing heard in that decisive moment, no emergency call, no ambulance lights, no long days in the hospital, no sleepless nights of fear and hope. Evan would have been only a name no one ever knew, a life erased before it could exist in anyone's memory, and so would I. There are losses that don't kill you immediately, but leave you living on like a shadow. If I had turned away that day, I would have lived the rest of my life with a question that never had an answer. Every time I looked at the lake, I would have wondered, what if I had run down? I would have carried that weight to the end of my days, heavier even than the pain of losing Nathaniel. People often think courage means having no fear. The truth is different. I was terrified. I was afraid of falling, afraid of the cold, afraid of facing something too terrible to endure. I was even afraid that I might be wrong, afraid it was all a misunderstanding that would make me look foolish. But love was stronger than that fear. Not loud love, not the bravery of the young. It was the quiet love of a mother who had already lost a child, who understood that some things, if you don't do them in that moment, you never get another chance. It was love without promises, without guarantees, simply the force that pushes you forward even when your legs are shaking. That love was stronger than age. I've heard many people talk about the limits of old age, that we should slow down, stay safe, let others handle difficult things. Maybe they're right in many cases. But age does not take away the ability to choose what's right. It doesn't erase the responsibility of the heart, and it certainly doesn't make love weaker. There are days when I'm very tired. My back hurts. My hands shake. Some mornings it takes me longer to get out of bed, but not once have I thought I was too old to love, too old to protect, or too old to do what needed to be done. That love was also stronger than evil. Evil often appears reasonable. It has reasons. It has motives. It calls itself a solution. Lysanne believed what she did was necessary to protect her own life. She chose to erase whatever stood in her way. But evil, no matter how many layers of logic it wears, cannot withstand the light when the truth is pulled up. Just like that suitcase years ago forced to rise to the surface. I didn't defeat evil with strength or exceptional intelligence. I simply didn't turn away. I chose to run toward the sound, toward the thing that frightened me most. And that choice changed everything. Now, when I stand by the lake on quiet mornings, I look at the water without trembling as before. I don't forget what happened. I don't want to forget. But the memory is no longer an open wound. It becomes a reminder that in this life there are very brief moments when your choice determines not only someone else's fate, but how you will live with yourself afterward. Evan runs around the yard, his laughter filling the air. He doesn't know his life once hung on a few seconds. He only knows there is a home, a pair of arms, and a world safe enough for him to grow up in. And that is enough. I chose not to turn back, not because I was certain I would win, not because I thought I was stronger than others, but because I knew that if I didn't step forward, I would never forgive myself. There are choices you can't redo. And looking back on the road behind me, with all the loss, the fear, and even the small miracles, I know I chose right, not because of the outcome, but because of the reason I walked forward. If you're still here, listening all the way to these final lines, I want to thank you, not as a viewer, but as someone who has walked with me through the entire journey. Tell me where you're watching this story from. A busy city, a small town, or a quiet place you call home. And I want to ask you something, honestly. If it were you, in that moment by the lake, when everything was still uncertain and frightening, would you run toward the sound? Or would you turn away, like so many of us have done in life? Leave a comment. It doesn't have to be long, just real. I read every line, and I believe your story deserves to be heard too. If you see yourself in this story, in the fear, in the choice, in unconditional love, please press like and stay with me by subscribing to the channel, because there are still many stories left untold, and maybe one of them will help someone out there find the courage not to turn back.